Hannah Brooks dropped to her knees in the dirt of the Walker yard and pressed her last silver coin into the mud, burying it like the only thing she had left in this world. "I don't want your bed," she said, her voice cracking clean in half. "Just a corner. One corner where nobody drags me out before the sun comes up." 6 boys froze on the porch. A widower's jaw went hard as a fence post. And not one soul in that yard yet knew that a woman folks called too heavy to matter was about to build a whole family out of ruins. Before we go on, if this story is already tugging at your heart, please subscribe to the channel. Stay with Hannah all the way to the end and leave a comment telling me which town or city you're watching from tonight. I love seeing just how far these stories travel. Now, let's begin. She had knelt in that dirt because her legs had quit on her a half-mile back. Hannah Brooks did not tell the widower that. She would sooner have swallowed the coin than let a stranger see how far past empty she was running. But her knees had buckled the second the ranch house came into view, and now here she was, kneeling in the yard of a man she had never met, with 6 pairs of eyes drilling into her back. "Get up," a boy said, not the man. A boy. 16 maybe. His voice had that raw edge that comes right before it settles into a man's. "We don't kneel to nobody here, and we sure don't feed every drifter that falls over in the yard." "Jacob." The widower said the name once, low. It landed like a hand on a shoulder. The boy shut his mouth, but his eyes stayed mean. Hannah got up. It took her longer than she wanted. She braced one hand on her knee and pushed, and she felt every one of them watching her do it, watching the way her body moved, watching and deciding. She had lived 30 years inside this body, and she knew that look the way a farmer knows the smell of coming rain. She had seen it in Cheyenne, in Miles City, in 3 ranches and 2 towns and 1 church that told her charity was for the deserving. She straightened her back. She looked the widower in the eye. "My name's Hannah Brooks," she said. "I've cooked for cattle crews since I was 19. I can mend anything with a needle. I can keep a house so it feels like a house instead of a barn with a stove. I walked from the Dunmore place because they let me go, and I've got no horse and no people, and 1 coin I was fixing to give you for the privilege of not being run off tonight." The widower did not move. He was a tall man, thick through the shoulders, gone gray at the temples before his time. He had the kind of face that gave a person nothing. Hannah had learned to read those faces. Sometimes there was kindness underneath. More often, there was a wall, and behind the wall, a man who had decided a long time ago that the world would not get another inch out of him. "They let you go," he said. "The Dunmores." "Yes, sir." "Why?" She could have lied. She was good at lying by then. She had a whole trunk of soft lies packed and ready. "My mother took ill. The work dried up. The missus and I didn't suit." She looked at those 6 boys, and something in her refused. "Mrs. Dunmore said I ate more than I earned," Hannah said. "She said a woman my size was a poor advertisement for her table. She said it in front of the crew, and the crew laughed, and I finished the supper dishes, and I left before dawn because I didn't care to hear it twice." Nobody laughed now. The little one she'd put him at 10 had crept to the edge of the porch. He was staring at her with his mouth open, and she saw him work something out in his head, saw the exact moment a child does the arithmetic of cruelty and comes up confused. "That's a mean thing to say," the little one said. "Noah," said the oldest boy. Tall, careful a young man, really, with a crease between his brows that had no business on a face that young. "Go on inside." But she... Inside. The little one didn't go inside. He sat down on the top step instead and hugged his knees and kept staring at Hannah like she was a puzzle he meant to finish. The widower still hadn't moved, but something had shifted behind that wall of a face. Hannah saw it and didn't dare believe it. "You said you can cook," he said. "I can." "For how many?" "I've cooked for a crew of 30 men on a drive. 6 boys and a father won't strain me." A sound came off the porch. A short, surprised sound. It came from a boy of about 20, wide across the mouth with a grin already halfway loaded, the kind of young man who kept a joke in his cheek like chewing tobacco. 6 boys and a father, the 20-year-old repeated. She counted us. She walked half a mile on dead legs, and she counted us. Luke? I'm just saying, Pa. She's got a head on her. The widower Pa then and Hannah filed that away. The first name she had for the wall of a man turned his head a fraction toward the boy called Luke, and for just a breath there was something in his eyes that Hannah had not expected. Not softness exactly, but a tiredness. A bone-deep, years-long tiredness. The kind a man gets from being the only warm thing in a cold house. How long you looking to stay? Pa said. Here it was. Hannah had learned to shrink this part. To ask for a night. To ask for less than she needed because people gave less than you asked, and if you asked for little, you might get a scrap. A week, she said. A week. 1 week. You put me to work. I cook, I mend, I clean, I earn my corner. If at the end of the week you decide I eat more than I earn. She let the words hang there, let Mrs. Dunmore's cruelty stand up naked in the yard between them. Then I'll go before dawn, and you won't hear a word of complaint out of me. You won't have to run me off. I'll run myself. The mean boy Jacob made a noise in his throat. Pa, you're not actually... I'm thinking. She'll eat us out of the winter stores by Thursday. Jacob. Sharper this time. The boy flinched, and Hannah watched the flinch, and she thought, oh, that one's not mean. That one's hurting so bad he's got to hand it off to somebody, or he'll drown in it. She'd cooked for 100 angry young men. She knew the difference between cruel and cornered. I've got a question for you, Mr. Walker, Hannah said. How'd you know my name? There's a brand on the gatepost. W-bar W. And a man doesn't raise 6 boys alone in the Montana Territory without the whole county knowing his name. Half of Miles City told me not to bother coming out here. Said the Walker place was cursed. Said a house that lost its mother stays lost. The words dropped into a dead silence. She watched them land on each boy in turn. The oldest went rigid. The joker's grin fell off his face and shattered. The mean one looked away. The little one hugged his knees tighter. And there was a 5th boy. She hadn't rightly clocked yet. A slight one, 14 or so, standing back in the doorway. Shadow. And at the word, mother, that boy went so white and so still that Hannah felt her heart pull sideways in her chest. Somebody had told this child it was his fault. She'd have bet her buried coin on it. That was cruel of me, Hannah said quiet into the silence. To say that. I'm sorry. I only meant that I came anyway. Everyone told me not to, and I came anyway. Because a house that lost its mother is exactly the kind of house that needs somebody to fix the little things. And I am very, very good at the little things. Daniel Walker looked at her for a long moment. Then he said the sentence that started everything. You can have your week. The mean boy exploded off the porch. Pa, you'll have your week, Daniel said over his son, straight to Hannah. And I'll tell you the truth of what you're walking into, because I don't hold with lying to somebody who's about to sleep under my roof. This house is broke, not for money. We got money enough. It's broke some other way. My wife's been in the ground 14 months, and every one of these boys is carrying something he won't set down, and I can't make them set it down, and I've stopped knowing how to try. You want to cook and mend and clean, you go right ahead. But don't you come in here thinking you'll fix us. Better women than you have tried and gone home crying. Hannah met his eyes. I'm not here to fix anybody, Mr. Walker, she said. I'm here to make sure there's a hot breakfast and clean shirts and a house that don't feel like a barn. That's all I ever offer. That's all I've got. If it fixes anything, that's God's business and not mine. For the first time, the wall in Daniel Walker's face cracked. It was small, just a flicker at the corner of his mouth. But Hannah saw it, and she filed it away with the rest. Nathan, Daniel said. Show her the storage room off the kitchen. It ain't much. I don't need much, Hannah said. I told you, a corner. You'll get the storage room. It's got a door that latches. Woman ought to have a door that latches. He said it flat, like it was nothing. Like it wasn't the kindest thing anyone had said to her in a year and a half. Hannah had to look at the ground for a second. Just a second. When she looked up, her eyes were dry because she had gotten very good at that too. "Thank you, Mr. Walker." "Daniel," he said. Then, like he regretted the smallness of the mercy, "Or Mr. Walker, suit yourself." And he turned and walked toward the barn, and the boys scattered off the porch like birds off a wire, all except the oldest Nathan, who came down the steps slow and stood in front of her. Up close, he was even younger than his crease let on, and even more tired. "You heard my pa," Nathan said. "This isn't a soft place. I run the crews, I keep the books, I make sure everybody eats and nobody dies, and I have been doing that since I was 20 and my mother took sick. I don't need a mother. I'm nobody's boy. You understand me." "I understand you, Nathan. So don't—" His voice snagged. He was so tired she could have wept for him, and she'd known him 90 seconds. "Don't come in here and start acting like—" "I'm going to cook you a breakfast tomorrow," Hannah said gently. "And I'm going to need to know what your brother's like, because a good cook feeds people what they love, and not just what's in the barrel. That's not mothering, Nathan. That's my trade. Same as yours is books and cattle. Now, will you show me my corner, or shall I find it myself?" He looked at her a long moment, then grudging, "The little one likes his eggs runny. It disgusts everybody. He won't eat them any other way." "Runny eggs for Noah," Hannah said. "Thank you. What's your name for the rest of them in the order I met them?" And Nathan Walker, 22 years old and older than his father, some days stood in that yard and told a stranger who his brothers were, and Hannah listened to every word like it was scripture. Luke was the loud 120, who'd been the family's laugh before their mother died, and had gotten louder since so loud you could hardly hear the crying underneath. Benjamin was 18 and hadn't strung 6 words together since the funeral. Jacob was 16 and furious at the whole world, and Nathan didn't say why, but Hannah had already guessed. Samuel was 14, the slight one, the white one, and Nathan's voice went careful around Samuel's name in a way that told Hannah everything. "And Noah's 10, Nathan finished. "He was 8 when Ma died. He's starting to forget her. He doesn't say so, but he asks me things. What did she smell like? Did she sing? He's forgetting, and it's killing him, and I don't—" He stopped. His jaw worked. "I don't know how to hold a whole family in my 2 hands, ma'am. I've been trying, and I keep dropping pieces." It was the first time he'd called her ma'am. "You're not supposed to hold it in 2 hands, Nathan," Hannah said. "That's not how families are built. It takes more hands than that. Now show me the kitchen so I can start earning my week." The storage room off the kitchen was exactly what he'd promised. Not much. A cot with a rope frame gone slack. Shelves of dry goods to the ceiling. A window painted shut and gone gray. It smelled of flour and mouse and old lard. It had a door that latched. Hannah stood in the middle of it and set down her canvas bag, and for one wild moment, the whole weight of the last 18 months came up her throat like flood water. She'd buried a husband. She'd buried a child that never got to breathe. She'd walked 400 miles of other people's contempt with a bag and a coin, and here was a room that smelled of mouse, and it had a door that latched, and it was the closest thing to safe she'd stood in since the fever took Thomas. She did not cry. She had made herself a rule about crying in other people's houses. Crying was a thing you did alone quiet so nobody could use it against you. She rolled up her sleeves instead. She found the kitchen a shameful mess. Not from meanness, from grief. She knew grief messes when she saw them. This was a kitchen where a woman used to stand, and after she was gone, nobody could bear to stand in her place, so they let it rot around the edges, rather than move her things. There was a rolling pin worn to the shape of a dead woman's hands. There was an apron on a hook nobody had touched in 14 months, gray with dust down one side, where the door draft hit it. Hannah did not touch the apron. She had her own. She took it out of her bag and put it on, and got to work with the things nobody loved. She scoured the stove. She scrubbed a decade of somebody else's neglect out of the wood counters. She found the flour weevily, and the coffee stale, and the smokehouse holding a ham that would do if she trimmed it hard. She took stock the way she took stock of everything fast and honest, and by the time the light went blue in the painted window, she had biscuit dough resting and beans soaking, and a plan for a supper that would feed 7 people and prove exactly one thing. The mean boy found her first. Jacob came in loud, meaning to catch her at something. She could see it in the set of his shoulders. He'd been telling himself a story about her all afternoon, and he'd come to make it true. "You moved Ma's things," he said. "I moved nothing that was hers," Hannah said, not turning around wrist deep in a pot. "I moved a stale sack of flour and I scrubbed a stove. If a thing was hers, it's where she left it. That apron on the hook, the rolling pin in the drawer, the blue cup up on the high shelf that somebody put where small hands couldn't reach. I didn't touch any of it, and I won't. And if I ever need to, I'll ask you first. That suit you?" The boy said nothing. She heard him breathing behind her hard, the way boys breathe when they've loaded up an argument and the other person won't take the bait. "You don't know anything about her," Jacob said finally. "Rough, wet, no." Hannah agreed. "I don't, but I know that blue cup was hers, because it's the only pretty thing in this kitchen, and it's kept up high like it's precious. I know the rolling pin was hers because it's worn to a woman's grip, and none of you men have hands that shape. I can read a kitchen, Jacob. It's the only kind of reading I'm any good at. And this whole kitchen is a woman who was loved, and a family that don't know what to do with the loving now she's gone." She turned around then. The boy's face was coming apart. 16 years old, jaw clenched to keep it together, eyes streaming anyway, furious at his own eyes for betraying him. "I hate that you're here," he said. "I know. We don't need you." "I know that too." "Then why won't you—" He scrubbed his face hard with his sleeve. "Why won't you just say something mean back so I can hate you right?" Hannah's heart broke clean in two. "Because you've got enough people saying mean things, sweetheart," she said. "I reckon you don't need one more. Now, do you like your beans with molasses or without? I aim to make them either way, and I'd rather make them the way you'll eat them." The boy stared at her. "Without," he said, wrecked. "Ma made them without." "Without it is." He left fast before he could fall apart the rest of the way. Hannah turned back to her pot and let out a long, slow breath and made the beans without molasses, and she did not cry, because she had a rule. A wagon rolled into the yard mid-afternoon. Hannah heard it before she saw it, the jingle of good harness, the kind of rig a woman with money drives and wants you to hear coming. She wiped her hands and stepped to the door, and there sat Mrs. Alma Pruitt, on a spring seat gloved and hatted, and looking down at the Walker place like a hawk deciding whether the mouse was worth the dive. "You're new," Mrs. Pruitt said. "Yes, ma'am." "Well?" The woman's eyes went over Hannah the way Hannah had been gone over 10,000 times top to bottom the arithmetic of the scale. "I heard Daniel Walker had taken on help. I confess I pictured something more. She let it hang cruel and delicate, suited to the work. Ranch work is hard on a body. I'd have thought a man in his situation would want somebody quick on her feet. I manage, ma'am. I'm sure you do your best." She said best like it was a small and pitiable thing. "I've brought a basket for the boys, from the Ladies' Aid. We've been looking after those poor motherless children since dear Mary passed, God rest her. It's a Christian duty keeping an eye on a broken household. You understand? Somebody responsible has to." Her gaze flicked over Hannah again, and the meaning was plain as a slap. "Somebody responsible, not you. That's kind of the Ladies' Aid," Hannah said evenly. "The boys are out with their father. I'll see they get the basket. I'd sooner hand it to Daniel direct." "Then you'll be waiting on the seat a while, ma'am, because he's mending fence in the south section, and he don't come in till the light goes." Mrs. Pruitt's mouth pinched. She wasn't used to being managed by the help, and certainly not by help built like Hannah, and Hannah watched the woman decide to make her pay for it. "My husband holds the note on this ranch, you know," Mrs. Pruitt said, sweet as a snakebite. "Harlan looks out for the Walkers, out of the goodness of his heart. So when I take an interest in who's living under this roof and eating out of these stores, it isn't idle. A grieving man is easily taken advantage of. A woman shows up out of nowhere, no people, no history, and settles herself into a household with 6 boys and a widower." Her eyes glittered. "Well, folks in town will talk. They're already talking. I'd hate for your reputation to be the thing that cost Daniel his good name on top of everything else he's lost." The words were meant to land like a fist, and they did. But Hannah had been hit by better than Alma Pruitt. "Ma'am," Hannah said, quiet and steady, "I've got no reputation worth costing anybody anything. I'm a cook and a mender who sleeps in the storage room off the kitchen behind a door that latches. I'll be gone in a week if I don't earn my keep, and if I do earn it, that's between Mr. Walker and his conscience and no business of the Ladies' Aid. Now, I'll take that basket in for the boys, and I thank you, and I've got beans on the stove that'll scorch if I stand here being talked at much longer." "Well," Mrs. Pruitt drew herself up, "I see how it is." "I don't reckon you do, ma'am, but that's all right." The woman's face had gone blotched and ugly, and she opened her mouth to fire off something that would burn, and that was when Daniel Walker came around the corner of the house. He'd come in early. Later, Hannah would learn Jacob had ridden out to the south section to fetch him, that the mean boy had heard the good harness jingle and known that sound and gone tearing across 2 miles of pasture to bring his father home before the town woman could do her damage. That was the first thing Jacob Walker ever did for Hannah, and he did it furious, and he never once admitted to it. Daniel took in the yard in one look. His wife's basket woman on the seat. Hannah in the door with her chin up and her eyes bright. He walked to the wagon slow, and he tipped his hat, and his voice, when it came, was mild as milk and hard as an anvil underneath. "Alma." "Daniel, I heard some of what you were just—" He set one boot on the wheel hub and looked up at her unhurried. "You'll want to take your basket back to the Ladies' Aid with my thanks. My family's fed. Better fed than it's been in over a year, matter of fact. And you'll want to tell Harlan and anybody else in town who's talking that the woman standing in that door has more decency in her scalded hands than this whole county's shown my boys since we put their mother in the ground. You all watched us starve for kindness for 14 months and called it Christian duty to bring a basket once a season. She walked in yesterday off the road with nothing and made my sons laugh at supper. So you talk all you like, Alma, but you'll do it off my land." The silence rang. Mrs. Pruitt's face worked. "Harlan holds your note, Daniel." "He does." Daniel stepped back off the wheel. "And I've never once been late on it, and I never will be. And the day I need Harlan Pruitt's charity to keep my family is the day I'll have already lost it. Good afternoon, Alma. Mind the ruts on the county road. They're bad this time of year." The wagon left in a spray of dust and wounded dignity. Daniel stood in the yard and watched it go. Then he turned and looked at Hannah in the doorway, and neither of them said anything for a moment, because there wasn't a way to say it that wouldn't be too much. "You didn't have to do that," Hannah said finally. "I've handled worse than her standing up." "I know you have." Daniel took off his hat, ran a hand through his gray-shot hair, put it back on. "I didn't do it for you, not only. I did it because my boys have listened to this whole town pity them for a year, and I'm sick to death of it, and because a man ought to be able to say out loud who's welcome at his own table." He started for the barn, then stopped. "Hannah." "Yes." "That basket she brought, what's in it?" Hannah lifted the cloth and looked. "Preserves, some bread gone hard, a cake." "Feed it to the hogs," Daniel Walker said, and walked to the barn, and Hannah stood in the doorway and laughed out loud for the first time in a year and a half. One bright, startled bark of a laugh alone in the yard, before she caught herself and carried the basket inside. Supper was the test, and she knew it. She'd cooked 7 suppers a day for men who'd have ridden through fire for a woman who fed them right, and would have dumped a plate on her head if she fed them wrong. She knew what a table could do. A table could be a battlefield, or a table could be a bandage. She meant this one to be a bandage. She rang the triangle at the door. Nobody had rung it in 14 months, and the sound brought them all up short in the yard. 6 boys and a father, all of them looking at the door like it had spoken with a dead woman's voice. They came in slow. They sat down slower. They watched her carry the food to the table, with the flat suspicion of people who had been disappointed enough times to stop expecting. She set it down. Biscuits gone gold, beans without molasses, ham trimmed and fried. Eggs, she'd made a plate of them, and she reached across the table and set the runny ones directly in front of the little one, Noah, without a word. Noah looked at his runny eggs. Then he looked up at her, and his whole small face did something complicated, and he said, "How'd you know?" "A little bird," Hannah said, and did not look at Nathan, who had gone very still at the head of the table beside his father. The little one ate his runny eggs. For a while nobody spoke. That was all right. Hannah had learned that silence at a table wasn't the enemy. Cold food was the enemy. Empty plates going out untouched was the enemy. And these plates weren't untouched. The 18-year-old Benjamin, the one who hadn't spoken since the funeral, he ate like a man who'd forgotten he was hungry until the food was in front of him, head down, methodical, and Hannah didn't push a single word at him. She just kept his plate from going empty. That was a language, too. It was Luke the Joker who broke first. "These biscuits," he said mouthful, "are a crime. I want to file a complaint. Somebody's been feeding us river rocks for 14 months and calling it bread, and now I find out biscuits can taste like this. It's a fraud. It's a conspiracy. Pa, we've been swindled." "You did the cooking, Luke," Nathan said. "That's my point. I've been swindling my own family. I should be arrested." He pointed his fork at Hannah. "Ma'am, you have exposed me. I'll never cook again. It's the only decent thing to do." And a small, terrible miracle happened. The little one laughed. It came out of Noah before he could stop it. A real laugh, high and surprised, and the second it was out, he clapped his own hand over his mouth like he'd done something wrong. Like laughing was a thing that wasn't allowed in this house anymore. His eyes went straight to his father, wide scared, and Daniel Walker. The wall of a man. The man behind the wall looked at his youngest son laughing with his hand clapped over his mouth, and something moved across his face that Hannah would remember for the rest of her life. "It's all right, Noah," Daniel said. His voice came out rough. "You can laugh. Your ma'd have laughed loudest of anybody." The little one took his hand off his mouth, and Hannah Brooks stood at the end of that table with a dish rag in her hands and understood all at once and all the way down exactly what she had walked into. This wasn't a job. This was a house that had forgotten how to be alive, and she had a week to remind it, and she was going to spend every hour of that week fighting for these 7 wrecked and beautiful people, whether they wanted her to or not. She did not tell them that. She refilled the biscuit plate instead. The slight one Samuel hadn't eaten much. Hannah had watched him the whole meal without seeming to. 14 years old, moving his food around, taking a bite when he thought somebody was looking, going still when they weren't. She knew that too. She'd done it herself the year after the baby. When a body's carrying a thing too heavy, food is one more weight it can't lift. When the meal broke up and the boys carried their own plates to the wash basin, she noted that filed at a house where the children cleaned up after themselves was a house a good woman had trained before she died. Hannah caught Samuel at the basin, quiet, just the two of them. "You didn't care for the ham," she said. Not a question, not an accusation, just a fact laid gently on the counter between them. "It was good," Samuel said, barely a whisper. I'm not real hungry lately." "That happens," Hannah said, "when a person's carrying something heavy. The stomach's the first thing to close up shop." She kept her hands in the dishwater, kept her eyes on the plates, made it the easiest conversation in the world for a boy to slip out of. "I lost my husband a year and a half back, fever, and I didn't eat right for the better part of a year after because it felt wrong somehow. Eating, living, doing the ordinary things when he couldn't. Like it wasn't fair. Like every biscuit was a thing I was stealing from him." Samuel had gone very still beside her. "Does it go away?" he said. So quiet she almost lost it under the water. "The feeling. Like it's your fault. Like if you'd just done something different. Samuel." Hannah set down the plate. She turned and looked at the boy full on, and she chose her next words the way a person chooses their steps across thin ice. "Whatever you think you did, or didn't do, whatever anybody's let you go on believing, your mother's dying was not your fault. Sickness isn't a punishment, and it isn't a debt, and a 14-year-old boy did not have the power to stop it, no matter what your grief is telling you at night. You hear me?" The boy's chin was trembling. "I was supposed to fetch the doctor," he whispered. "I got lost. I took the wrong. I was gone 4 hours, and when I got back, she was—" His face crumpled. "If I'd found him sooner." "No." Hannah said it soft, but she said it like iron. "No, sweetheart. A doctor 4 hours sooner would not have saved her from what took her, and if you want, when you're ready, I'll help you find that out for certain from somebody who knows. But I'll tell you what I already know for certain tonight. Your mother did not spend her last hours blaming a lost little boy. Mothers don't. Mothers spend their last hours loving. I'd stake my life on it. She was loving you, Samuel, right to the end. Not blaming. Loving." The boy broke. He broke quiet the way children break when they've learned that loud grief gets shushed. He put his back to the wall and slid down it and folded up and shook, and Hannah did not gather him up because she didn't have the right yet, and a boy that age might not have wanted it. She crouched down beside him instead, close, and put one hand flat on the floor next to his, so he'd know she was there and staying, and she let him cry, the first real cry he'd cried in 14 months. She didn't hear Daniel in the doorway. She didn't know how long he'd been standing there. When she finally looked up, he was in the dark of the hall with his hand braced on the frame, and his face was wet, and he was looking at his son crying on the kitchen floor like a man looking at rain after a 7-year drought. He didn't come in. He gave the boy that. He just met Hannah's eyes across the room over his son's bent head, and he mouthed 2 words she'd carry a long time. "Thank you." Then he was gone back into the dark, and Hannah stayed on the floor with Samuel until the boy had cried himself empty and could stand up and wash his face and go to bed a fraction lighter than he'd been in over a year. The first night she barely slept, not from the slack cot or the mouse smell or the strangeness, from listening. She'd trained herself over the years to sleep light in other people's houses, one ear always up, because a woman alone learns to hear a door before it opens. But this night she lay awake for a different reason. She lay awake the way a body does when it has walked into a burning house, and has finally, after a long time of walking, found something worth burning for. Around midnight, she heard the crying, small, muffled, down the hall. A child trying not to be heard. Hannah lay still and listened, and placed it the little one, Noah the youngest, 10 years old, crying into a pillow so nobody would know. And she heard, too, the older boy's door open, and a heavier tread. Nathan she thought going to see, and she heard Nathan's low voice, tired past tired. Hey, it's okay, go back to sleep." And she heard the crying not stop. Hannah got up. She didn't put on her boots. She went down the hall in her stocking feet, and found Nathan sitting on the edge of the little one's bed, in the dark, out of his depth, patting his brother's back with a hand that had rebuilt fences and pulled calves and buried a mother, but did not know how to do this. "I've got him, Nathan," Hannah said softly from the door. "You've been up since before dawn. Go on and sleep. I've got him." Nathan turned. In the dark, she couldn't read his face, but she heard the surrender in his voice, and she understood what it cost a boy like that to surrender even an inch. "He has bad dreams," Nathan said. "About Ma. He can't sometimes. He can't remember her face, and it scares him worse than the dreams." "I know, honey. Go to bed." He went. He was too tired not to. Hannah sat down where he'd been on the edge of the little one's bed, and the child rolled toward her, half asleep, not rightly knowing who she was, and said into the dark the thing that undid her. "I can't remember if she sang to me," Noah whispered. "Nathan says she did, but I can't hear it. I try, and I can't hear her voice anymore, and if I forget her voice, then she's really gone, isn't she? She's really all the way gone. Shh." Hannah put her hand on the little boy's hair. "Shh now. Listen to me." Forgetting the sound isn't losing her. "You want to know how I know?" How he breathed. "Because she's in you. In the shape of your face. In the runny eggs you love that nobody else can stand. Your brother told me she made hers the same way. You didn't know that till just now, did you? But it was true all along. That's her in you in the eggs. You've been carrying her every single morning, and you didn't even know it." Hannah kept stroking the child's hair slow the way you gentle a scared colt. The voice'll come back to you sometimes. In dreams. Sudden when you're not reaching for it. And when it doesn't come, you just remember she's in the eggs and you're not so lost. All right. The little one was quiet a long time. Then small drifting. Will you make them tomorrow? The runny ones. Every morning you want them, Hannah said. That's a promise. You said you're only staying a week. Hannah's throat closed up. Well, she said when she could, we'll see about that. Go to sleep now, Noah. I'm right here. Nobody's going anywhere tonight. The child slept. Hannah stayed until his breathing went deep and even, and then she stayed a while longer sitting in the dark of a dead woman's house full of that dead woman's grieving children. And she made herself a promise she had no right to make on the strength of one day's acquaintance. They'd have to drag her out of here. She'd asked for a coroner. She'd meant it when she asked. But somewhere between the buried coin and the runny eggs and the boy crying on the kitchen floor, the asking had changed shape in her chest. And now, God help her, she wanted the whole house. Not to own it, to belong to it. She was 30 years old, and she had buried everyone who'd ever belonged to her, and she had walked 400 miles, telling herself she'd stopped wanting a family because wanting one only got it taken away. She'd been lying to herself the whole walk. She wanted it so bad, her ribs ached. She went back to the storage room before dawn, and she did not sleep. And when the black window went gray, she got up and put on her apron and lit the stove and cracked the eggs. And she was standing at that stove making runny eggs for a 10-year-old when Daniel Walker came in for his coffee and found her there and stopped in the doorway and looked at her a long moment in the gray early light. You didn't sleep, he said. Not much. The boy? He's all right. He'll sleep better now, I think. For a while. She poured his coffee without being asked and set it where his hand would find it. She'd noted the day before which side of the table was his. He's scared he's forgetting his mother's face. I told him she's in the eggs. It's the best I had. Daniel Walker picked up his coffee. He didn't drink it. He held it in both hands and looked into it, and when he spoke his voice was so low she almost didn't catch it. She used to make them the same way, the runny eggs, for Noah. He was the baby, and she spoiled him, and I used to complain the eggs turned my stomach, and she'd say, he stopped. His jaw worked. She'd say, Daniel Walker let me love the last one loud on account of he's the last one I get. She knew he was the last. Something in her knew, and she loved him loud right up to the end. He looked up at Hannah. Nobody's made those eggs since. I couldn't ask the boys to, couldn't ask myself to, and you walk in off the road and you make them the first morning like it's nothing. It wasn't nothing, Hannah said quietly. Nathan told me the boy liked them, that's all. Anything more than that came from her, not from me. I just cracked the eggs. Daniel Walker looked at her for a long moment across his dead wife's kitchen. You keep saying that, he said. You keep giving it back, the credit. Every kind thing you do, you hand it to somebody else. The bird told me. It came from her. I just cracked the eggs. He set his coffee down. Who taught you to do that? To do a good thing and refuse to be caught doing it? Hannah's hands went still on the stove. Nobody had ever asked her that. In 18 months of other people's kitchens, nobody had looked close enough to notice the thing she did, let alone ask her why she did it. When you're built like me, Hannah said, and she kept her back to him, and she kept her voice even because a rule is a rule. You learn early that if you want to be let stay, you'd best be useful and quiet about it. Loud kindness makes people wonder what you're after. Quiet kindness they can pretend they didn't see, and pretending they didn't see is how they let themselves keep you around. I learned to be useful and hard to notice at the same time. It's kept a roof over my head for 30 years. She flipped the eggs. You noticed anyway. That's twice now. Don't make a habit of it, Mr. Walker. I don't rightly know what to do when I'm noticed. The kitchen was quiet. Then Daniel Walker said, Daniel, what? You called me Mr. Walker. It's Daniel. And I'll tell you something, Hannah Brooks, and then I'll let you cook in peace. He stood up from the table. I've watched people come through this house since my wife died. Neighbors, churchwomen, a cousin of my wife's who lasted 3 weeks. Every one of them came in loud with their kindness, wanting the boys to see how much they were doing, wanting me to see, wanting credit for saving the poor Walker orphans. And the boys hated every one of them because children can smell it that kind of loud, helping the kind that's really about the helper. And then you kneel down in my yard, half dead, and bury your last coin in my dirt, and the first thing you do inside my house is find out how my youngest likes his eggs so you can love him quiet, without credit, without wanting to be caught. He was at the door now. He stopped. He didn't turn around. You asked for a corner. I want you to know I heard what you were really asking for. And I want you to know I'm not the kind of man who lets a person who loves my children quiet get run out of the county by another woman who thinks a body's worth is measured on a scale. He walked out to do the milking before she could answer. Hannah Brooks stood alone in the kitchen with a skillet of runny eggs, and her hand pressed flat over her mouth, and for the first time in a year and a half, she broke her rule. She cried in another person's house. She cried quiet at the stove so nobody would hear, and she wiped her face on her apron before the boys came down, and she plated the eggs and the biscuits and the fried ham. And she set the runny ones in front of Noah's chair, and she rang the triangle for breakfast in a house that was learning one meal at a time how to be a house again. They came down the stairs one by one. The little one first, straight to his eggs, and he looked up at her and grinned, gap-toothed, and said, "You promised." And she said, "I keep my promises." And he ate. Then the silent one, Benjamin, who sat and ate and did not speak, but who, Hannah saw it, she caught it, set his hand for 1 second on Noah's shoulder as he passed the barest touch, the first tenderness she'd seen from him. A mute 18-year-old learning to be a brother again in a language that didn't need words. Then the joker loud, already complaining the biscuits were a fraud, and the mean one Jacob, who came in with his shoulders up and his fists half made ready for a fight, and stopped when he saw his beans plate from last night had been washed and set at his place with a fresh biscuit on it, and looked at Hannah and didn't say anything cruel. Just sat down, just ate. For a boy that angry, it was practically a love letter. Then Samuel, the slight one, who came to the table and looked at Hannah with eyes that had cried themselves clean the night before, and who this was. The miracle of that second morning filled his own plate without being coaxed and ate. Not much, but some. And when he thought nobody was watching, he looked at Hannah, and the look said thank you, and the look said help me, and the look said don't go all at once, and Hannah gave him back a look that said I'm here. Then Nathan, last the oldest, the tiredest, who came down having slept a whole night through for the first time in 14 months, because somebody else had taken the midnight watch, and who stood in the kitchen doorway looking at his 6 brothers and his father at a full table with hot food, and the little one laughing, and who had to hold on to the doorframe for a second, because the sight of it was almost more than a 22-year-old boy could bear. Hannah put a cup of coffee in his hand. "Sit down, Nathan," she said gently. "Eat your breakfast. You did enough. For a long time you did enough all by yourself. You can set some of it down now, just for one breakfast, just for right now." Nathan Walker sat down. He set some of it down. And Daniel Walker came in from the milking and stood in his own kitchen doorway and looked at his whole family eating a hot breakfast at a loud table with a woman at the stove who kept giving the credit away, and he did not say a word because some things a man can't say in front of his sons without his voice breaking. But he caught Hannah's eye across the crowded, noisy living kitchen, and he tipped his hat to her. Right there in his own house. He tipped his hat to the woman who'd buried her last coin in his yard and asked for nothing but a corner, and Hannah understood exactly what it meant because she could read a man the way she could read a kitchen. It meant you're not a drifter here. It meant the week is a formality. It meant stay. She turned back to the stove so the boys wouldn't see her face, and she cracked 6 more eggs, because these were hungry growing boys, and one plate was never going to be enough. And behind her, the kitchen was loud with living. And for the length of one Montana morning, in the summer of 1888, a woman the whole county had called too heavy to matter stood exactly where she belonged, and knew it, and did not once let go of the spoon. The week had 2 days left in it, and Noah Walker had started counting. Hannah caught him at it the 3rd morning, sitting on the bottom stair with his knees up, moving his lips over his fingers. She set his runny eggs down and pretended she hadn't seen. 2. Noah said anyway. He didn't look up. 2 more, and then the week's done. Eat your eggs, honey. Pa said a week. The boy's chin came up and his eyes were older than 10. You promised runny eggs every morning. I want them. But you're leaving in 2 days, so which one's the lie? The whole kitchen went quiet. Nathan stopped with his coffee halfway up. Jacob's fork went still. Even Luke, who had a joke loaded for every silence, kept his mouth shut. Hannah crouched down in front of the boy so their eyes were level. Neither one's a lie, she said. The week's your pa's promise. The eggs are mine. And a body can only keep the promises that belong to her. She wiped a smudge off his cheek with her thumb. Now, you want to know a secret about my promises. What? I've never broke one in my life. Not once. So if I gave you eggs every morning, I mean to be somewhere I can crack them. You do the arithmetic on that, smart as you are. The boy stared at her. She watched him work it. She watched hope arrive in a 10-year-old's face like sun coming through a bad window, crooked and too bright. That means you're staying, Noah said. That means my promise means to stay, Hannah said, standing back up. Whether the rest of me gets to is up to a taller walker than you. Eat. Noah ate, but he ate fast, and then he was gone out the door, and Hannah didn't think anything of it until an hour later when Jacob came stamping into the kitchen with his face like weather. You need to talk to Noah, Jacob said. What's he done? He's out at the gate, digging. Jacob threw a look over his shoulder like the boy might follow him in. Digging up your coin. The silver one you buried the day you came. He's got it in his head that if he gives it back to you, you'll have your fare paid and you can't say you're too broke to stay or some fool child thing. He's been on his knees in the dirt for an hour. He won't come in. Hannah put down her rag. She found Noah exactly where Jacob said, both hands black to the wrist, and when he saw her coming, he held up the silver coin like a man holding up a heart he'd cut out of his own chest. I found it, Noah said. You buried it right here. I watched you. Here. He pushed it at her. Now you've got money. Now you can't leave 'cause you're poor. You have to think of a different reason, and there isn't one. Hannah's throat closed so tight she couldn't speak for a second. Noah Walker, she managed. Give me that hand. She took his dirty hand, and she folded his own fingers back over the coin, and she held them there, and she looked at him. You keep it, she said. That coin's yours now. You dug it up, it's yours, that's the law of buried things. And you hold on to it because a man ought to have something of his own that nobody can take. But listen to me, honey, and listen good. A woman doesn't stay in a place because she's too poor to leave. That's the worst reason there is to stay anywhere. A woman stays because she can't picture the morning she wouldn't get to make your eggs. Her voice broke on it, and she let it. I don't need your coin to make me stay. I need your pa to say the word. And that's not something a coin can buy. You understand? The boy's face crumpled. He threw his dirty arms around her neck, coin and all, and Hannah knelt in the dirt of the Walker yard for the second time since she'd come, and this time she wasn't begging for a corner. This time a child was holding on to her like she was the last post in a flood. She didn't see Daniel in the barn door. She didn't know he'd watched the whole thing. But that night, after the boys were down, he found her at the wash basin, and he stood in the kitchen doorway a long while before he said anything, and when he spoke his voice was rough. The week's up tomorrow, Daniel said. Hannah's hands went still in the water. I know it. I've been thinking on what to say to you. All day I've been thinking, and I had it worked out proper. And then I watched my youngest boy dig your coin out of the dirt with his bare hands, so you couldn't tell him you were too broke to stay. He took off his hat, turned it in his hands. And every fine word I had went to nothing, so I'll just say it plain the way you say things plain. Stay. Not for a week. Not for a wage, though you'll have a fair one. Stay because this house isn't a house without you in it anymore, and I'm too old and too tired to pretend I don't know that. Hannah turned around. You mean it? She said. Not a question. She was making him say it twice the way he'd made her. I mean it, Hannah Brooks. Stay. And there it was. The word. The one no town, no church, no ranch in 400 miles had ever handed her. Stay. She'd have given anything to say something graceful. Instead, she wiped her hands on her apron and said, "All right then," in a voice that shook clear through, and Daniel Walker nodded once and put his hat back on to leave, and at the door he stopped. "That storage room," he said. "It's no place for a person to sleep long term." "It suits me fine." "It doesn't suit me." He said it flat. Then, like he'd said too much, he ducked out into the dark before she could answer, and Hannah stood there wondering what a man meant by a thing like that, and put it out of her mind and never once guessed. The staying changed everything, and it changed nothing. Hannah still rose before the black window went gray. She still cracked Noah's eggs runny and set them at his place. But now she wasn't a drifter earning a week. Now she belonged to the mornings, and she poured herself into the little things the way water pours into low ground. She learned the boys by their damage the way she'd promised herself she would. She learned that Benjamin the Silent One hadn't gone mute out of grief alone. She learned it by watching. The boy's hands never stopped. He whittled. He mended tack. He carved little things out of pine and left them where they'd be found, and never signed his name to any of it, because Benjamin Walker had stopped believing his voice was worth the air, and so he'd taught his hands to say the things his mouth wouldn't. She found the first carving on her third week. A little pine bird no bigger than a thumb sat on the windowsill above her wash basin, where she'd be sure to see it. She held it a long time. Then she went out to the barn, where Benjamin was oiling a bridle, and she set the bird down on the bench beside him, and she didn't say thank you, because she'd already worked out that thank you was too many words for Benjamin and would send him running. "That's a meadowlark," Hannah said instead. "You got the beak just right. My husband used to whistle back at the meadowlarks. Drove me half crazy. He'd whistle, and they'd answer, and he'd carry on a whole conversation with a bird while I was trying to sleep." She picked the carving back up. "I'm keeping this one, but I'll want the pair to it if you've a mind. A meadowlark's no good alone. They mate for life, you know. One of them's always answering the other." Benjamin's hands stopped on the bridle. He didn't look up, but Hannah saw his jaw work, saw him fighting something down, and she left before he could win or lose the fight, because a boy that raw needed to be alone with the winning of it. The pair to the meadowlark showed up 2 days later. And on the fourth week, she got the twist she'd been quietly working toward without daring to hope for it. She was elbow deep in bread dough. Benjamin came in to fetch water, and as he passed her out of 18 months of silence, out of a throat that had rusted shut over his mother's grave, Benjamin Walker said 4 words. "You forgot the salt." That was all. 4 words. He said them low, almost to himself. And then he grabbed the water bucket and made for the door like the house was on fire. Hannah didn't chase him. She didn't cry out. She didn't make it into the miracle it was, because she knew in her bones that if she turned around and wept and hollered for Daniel, Benjamin Walker would climb right back down into his silence and pull the lid shut and never come out again. "I did forget the salt," Hannah said calmly to the bread. "Good catch. Fetch me the tin off the shelf, would you, since you're up?" There was a long-held silence. Then the water bucket set back down, and the salt tin arrived at her elbow, put there by a hand that shook. "Obliged," Hannah said, and went on kneading, and Benjamin went out for his water, and neither of them ever spoke of it. But that night at supper, when Luke made his usual crime of the biscuits joke, Benjamin said quiet, not looking up from his plate, "They're better than yours ever were," and the whole table stopped dead. And then Luke let out a whoop that rattled the windows, and reached across and grabbed his brother by the neck, and shook him, laughing, saying, "He speaks. The dead have risen. Somebody write this down." And Benjamin was almost smiling. Almost, and Daniel Walker had to put down his fork and press his knuckles hard against his own mouth. Later on the porch, Daniel said to Hannah, 14 months. 14 months I've waited to hear that boy say a word. Doctors, his Aunt Me, nothing, and he says it over your bread." "He's been talking the whole time," Hannah said. "You just couldn't hear it on account of he was saying it in pine and leather instead of words. He'll come the rest of the way now. Slow. Don't rush him. And don't you dare make a fuss the first time he laughs out loud, or you'll scare it back into him. You hear me, Daniel Walker?" "I hear you." He was quiet a while. "How do you know all this? About the boys? You've been here a month, and you know my sons better than I do, and I sired every one of them." Hannah looked out at the dark. "Because nobody ever knew me," she said simply. "My whole life. So I learned to know other people instead. It was the only way to be worth keeping." She said it without pity, just a fact the way she said everything. A woman folks look past learns to look hard at everybody else. It's not a gift, Daniel. It's a scar that turned useful. Don't envy it. Daniel Walker didn't say anything to that, but his hand resting on the porch rail between them moved half an inch closer to hers. Not touching, just closer. And Hannah looked at that hand at the half an inch, and she understood exactly what it was and what it cost him, and she left it there, and she didn't move her own hand away. That was as far as either of them went that night. But it was further than either had gone in years. The trouble came the next morning, and it came in good harness. Hannah heard the wagon, and her stomach dropped because she knew that jingle now. But it wasn't Alma Prewitt on the seat this time. It was a man, soft-handed, soft-bellied in a town coat too fine for a ranch road, and he didn't get down. He sat up there and waited to become to the way men wait when they believe the whole county was built to fetch them things. "That'll be Harlan," Daniel said, coming around from the barn, wiping his hands slow. His voice had gone careful. "Go on inside, Hannah." "I'll bring coffee." "You'll go inside." He didn't say it unkind. He said it like a man putting a body behind him. Harlan Prewitt's got a smile that means he's about to take something. I'd sooner he not get a good look at what all he could take. Hannah went as far as the door. She did not go through it. She'd learned a long time ago that a woman who leaves the room is a woman who finds out later what was decided about her, and she was done finding out later. Harlan Prewitt smiled down from his seat. "Daniel." "Harlan, you're a long way from your bank. Doing my rounds. A banker who never leaves his desk doesn't know his customers." Prewitt's eyes went past Daniel to Hannah in the doorway and lingered, and Hannah felt the old arithmetic run over her, the weighing. "This the woman my Alma mentioned, the one from off the road." "She's my cook." "So she is." Prewitt's smile never moved. Alma was concerned. You know how the church ladies talk. A widower, 6 impressionable boys, a strange woman under the roof with no references and no people. It reflects. On you. On the standing of a family that owes— He paused, delicate. "The amounts your family owes." "I've never been late a day in my life on that note," Daniel said. No, you haven't." Prewitt let that sit. "But notes come due, Daniel. This one comes due at the end of summer. Balloon payment the whole balance. You'll recall the terms. Your late wife signed them alongside you. God rest her in a hard year when you needed the cash to save the herd. $1,400 due September. In full." The number landed in the yard like a dropped anvil. Hannah watched Daniel's face. It didn't move, but she saw the cost of it not moving. "I know the terms, Harlan. Do you have the 1,400? Silence. Because if you don't—" Prewitt went on gentle as a man petting a dog he means to shoot. "There are arrangements we might come to. I've a mind to consolidate some of the water frontage along the creek. Your creek acreage particularly. Cattle need water, and the man who owns the water owns the valley. I'd take the creek quarter off your hands, credit it against the note, and you'd keep the house and the home pasture free and clear. Everybody walks away whole. It's a generous offer, Daniel. Alma would say it's more than generous given the circumstances." His eyes flicked to Hannah again. The circumstances a man's put himself in. Daniel Walker was quiet a long moment. "The creek quarter's the best water in this county," he said. "Without it, my herd's dead by August in a dry year. You know that. That's why you want it. You take my creek, and inside 2 summers, you own every ranch downstream of it, because you'll charge them for the water God gave the valley free." "I'd never—" "You'd do exactly that, Harlan. You've done it to the Hendersons. You've done it to old man Cobb. Half this valley's paying you for creek water that used to be theirs, and now you've come for mine, and you've dressed it up in Alma's church lady worry about my housekeeper, so I'll be too ashamed to see straight." Daniel stepped up close to the wagon. He wasn't loud. That was the frightening part. "You take your generous offer and your concern for my standing, and you get off my land. I'll have your 1,400 by September. In full. And I'll keep my creek." Prewitt's smile finally slipped, just at one corner. "You don't have $1,400, Daniel." "I'll have it." "How?" Real curiosity now, and under it, real threat. "The cattle market's soft. Your beef won't bring it. You've 6 mouths to feed, and now a 7th. The look at Hannah again, and this time it had teeth. "I'd think very hard if I were you about what your pride is going to cost your sons. A man can lose a ranch out of stubbornness. It's the most common way there is. Get off my land, Harlan." Prewitt gathered his reins. He was still smiling, but it had gone cold all the way through now. "September," he said. "The full balance or the creek quarter. I'll be at my desk. Do give it thought." He touched his hat brim to Hannah, not to Daniel, and it was the ugliest courtesy she'd ever been paid. "Ma'am, enjoy your situation while it lasts." The wagon rolled out. Nobody spoke until the jingle of it died on the county road. Then Hannah came off the porch and stood beside Daniel, and she looked at the road, and she said quiet, "How much of that is true? The 1,400. All of it." Daniel's voice was flat with something she'd not heard in him before. Not fear. Worse than fear. The particular deadness of a proud man doing sums he can't win. "Mary took sick in a bad year. I borrowed to keep the herd alive so the boys would have something. She signed it with me. It was the last thing she ever signed her name to. And now Harlan Prewitt means to use my dead wife's signature to take my water, and I don't—" His jaw worked. "I don't have the money, Hannah. Not near. The cattle won't bring it. I've been telling myself something would turn up all summer, and nothing's turned up, and now he's put a date on it." Hannah was quiet. "You could have told me," she said. "You've been carrying this the whole month I've been making eggs and mending shirts and going on like the world was mending too." "It's not your trouble. Daniel Walker." She turned and faced him full on. "You told me to stay. You said this wasn't a house without me in it. Well, a person doesn't get to say that to a woman and then set her outside the trouble like she's a guest. I'm either in this family or I'm not, and you don't get it both ways. So, $1,400 by September. How much have you got toward it?" Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in his face. Surprise, and under it something that looked painfully like relief. The relief of a man who's carried a thing alone so long, he'd forgotten it could be set down. "Maybe 400, he said. "If the fall gather goes clean and the market holds, which it won't. Then we've got $1,000 to find in 3 months, Hannah said. And standing in the yard cursing Harlan Prewitt won't find a nickel of it. Come inside. We're going to sit down at that table and go through every account you've got and everything on this ranch that could turn $1, and we're going to find your money." "I ran a chuck wagon for a cattle outfit for 6 years, Daniel. I know how to squeeze $1 till it hollers. Now come inside." And Daniel Walker, who had faced down Harlan Prewitt without flinching, followed a cook into his own house because she told him to, and something in the following of it eased the deadness out of his face. That was the day the family stopped being a wound and started being an army. Hannah went through the books at the kitchen table with Nathan on one side and Daniel on the other, and she found things. She found $40 a year bleeding out on store credit at inflated prices because nobody had time to ride to the further town where goods came cheaper. She found a hay meadow they'd been letting a neighbor cut for a handshake when it should have been cash. She found that Mary Walker had put up preserves and traded them at the mercantile for years, a little income nobody had thought to keep up after she died. "I can put up preserves," Hannah said. "I can put up enough preserves to bury this county, and I can bake. There's not a church social or a cattleman's meeting between here and Miles City that couldn't be talked into buying pies off a woman who bakes like I do. It won't be $1,000. But it'll be a piece, and a piece is more than nothing, and it'll keep while you and the boys chase the rest." Nathan was staring at her. "You'd do that," he said. "Bake pies to help pay a debt that's got nothing to do with you." "It's got everything to do with me," Hannah said. "This is my home. First one I've had since I was a girl. You think I'll sit in it and watch a soft-handed banker take the creek without I bake a single pie in its defense?" She snapped the ledger shut. "Now, Nathan, you keep books like a man twice your age, and you've been carrying them alone in the dark. From now on, you carry them with me. 2 heads. We'll find the money, or we'll die trying, and either way you won't do it alone anymore. That part's over." Nathan Walker put his head down over the ledger. His shoulders shook once hard. He was 22 years old, and he had been the man of a broken family since he was a boy, and someone had just told him he could set part of it down, and the setting down of it broke something loose in him that had been jammed tight for over a year. Hannah put her hand on the back of his neck. "Just for a second. The way you'd steady a colt." "Set it down, Nathan," she said quietly. "Just this piece. Set it down." He set it down. The word went around the family without anybody saying it out loud. The Creek, September, $1,400 Prewitt. And a strange thing happened. The trouble that should have broken a fragile house did the opposite. It gave 6 grieving boys something to push against together. Grief you can only sit in. But a fight you can win, and a fight against Harlan Pruitt was a fight even Jacob could throw his whole furious heart into. Jacob was the one who surprised her most. She found him one evening in the barn, and he'd built a rack of stretched hides, deer and elk the boys had taken tanned and ready to sell. He'd been at it for a week in secret. "Buckskin brings money in town," Jacob said, not looking at her defiant, like he expected to be told it was worthless. "Gloves, coats. I've been tanning since I was 10. Ma taught me. It's the one thing I can do that's worth $1, so I'm doing it. For the creek." Hannah looked at the rack of hides. It was good work. It was careful, patient work from a boy who wore his fury like a coat 2 sizes too big. "Your mother taught you this," Hannah said. "Yeah." Jacob's jaw went tight. "So don't say anything about it. Don't make it a thing." "I won't." Hannah picked up a finished hide and ran her hand over it. Soft as butter. "Except this. You've been so angry since I came, Jacob, and I never once minded it because I knew what it was. But I want you to hear something, and then I'll leave you be." She set the hide down. A boy who tans hides in secret for a week to save his father's water is not an angry boy. He's a boy so full of love he doesn't know where to put it, and it comes out sideways as anger, because anger's the only door grief left him. That's all your temper ever was. Love with no place to go. She headed for the barn door. "You found it a place tonight. These hides. I'm proud of you. And your mother would be too, and I'd say so even if you throw something at me for it." Jacob didn't throw anything. Jacob stood in the barn with a scraping knife in his hand and his back to her, and Hannah heard him make a sound. The sound of a 16-year-old finally letting the love out the front door instead of the side. And she left him to it, and shut the barn behind her, because some things a boy that proud has to do where nobody can see. The house came alive in pieces, and one of the pieces came at supper, a week into the fight for the creek. It started with nothing. Luke stole a biscuit off Jacob's plate the way brothers do, and Jacob, who a month ago would have thrown a fist, grabbed for it back and missed, and Luke held it over his head, and Noah started chanting, "Fight, fight, fight," and Benjamin reached over quiet and took a biscuit off Luke's plate while Luke was distracted and ate it deadpan, staring straight ahead, and the whole table came apart. They laughed, all of them, at once. It wasn't polite laughing. It was the ugly, howling, can't-catch-your-breath laughing of boys, the kind that had been dammed up in that house for 14 months and came out all at once like a busted levee. Noah laughed so hard he slid clean under the table. Nathan put his head down on his arms and shook. Even Samuel, pale, careful Samuel, was wiping his eyes. And Daniel Walker sat at the head of his own table and watched his 6 sons laugh, and Hannah watched Daniel, and she saw a man come partway back from the dead. "Under the table, Noah," Daniel said when he could talk. "You'll ruin your appetite down there." "I already ruined it," Noah called up. "I ruined it laughing." Then come up here and ruin it eating." The boy climbed back up, and the meal went on loud, ordinary, a family being a family, and later Hannah would think that supper was the night the Walker house stopped being a place where a woman had died and started being a place where a family lived. She found out how much it had cost Daniel later on the porch when the boys were down. "That's the first time," Daniel said, "since Mary, that they all laughed at once. I'd forgot what it sounded like." "Hannah, I'll tell you something I've told nobody. For a while after she died, I thought about selling out, taking the boys east to Mary's people. I couldn't see how to raise 6 sons alone in a house that had all the joy gone out of it. I thought I'd already lost them, some of them, the way you lose a thing slow and don't notice till it's gone. You didn't lose them. I damn near did, and I sat here tonight and heard them laugh like that, and I—" His voice went. He stopped. He gripped the porch rail. "I don't know how you did it. In a month. What I couldn't do in a year. I didn't do it, Daniel." You gave the credit away again. "Because it's the truth. Those boys were always in there. The laugh was always in there. It just needed somebody to be in the house who wasn't drowning in the same grief. They were somebody who could stand on the bank and hold out a hand." Hannah looked out at the dark. "I could stand on the bank because I already did my drowning, years ago, in another life. That's the only gift I brought to this house, Daniel. I came already grieved. I had my crying done." Daniel was quiet a moment. "You said you lost your husband." "I did. Was there—" He stopped, careful. "You've a way with children, Hannah, that a woman doesn't come by from nothing." Hannah's hands went still in her lap. She had never told anyone. Not one soul in 400 miles. It was the one thing she kept locked in the bottom of the canvas bag of herself, too heavy to lift out. But the man beside her had just handed her his own worst thing, the selling out, the almost losing, and she found the words coming up her throat before she'd decided to let them. "There was a baby," Hannah said, "coming, when the fever took Thomas. I was 6 months along." She kept her voice even, because if she didn't keep it even, she'd lose it entirely. "I buried my husband, and I was so undone by it that I took a fever myself. And the baby came early in the middle of it, and she didn't—" She pressed her lips together. "She never took a breath. A girl. I had a girl for the length of one night, and then I buried her next to her father, and I got up off that bed, and I've been walking ever since. 18 months of walking. Because a house with 2 empty graves in the yard isn't a house a body can stay in." Daniel Walker didn't say he was sorry. He didn't reach for her. He knew better the way she'd known better with Samuel on the floor. He just moved his hand on the rail, the last half-inch, and covered hers. And Hannah let him, and the two of them sat in the dark, not talking, two people who'd each buried more than a person ought to, and it was the closest thing to comfort either had known in a long time. "Her name," Daniel said finally. "The baby. Did she have one? Grace." Hannah's voice broke clean on it the first time she'd said the name out loud since the night she'd buried it. "Her name was Grace." "Grace?" Daniel repeated, gentle, giving the name a place to live in the world for a second. "That's a fine name." And that was all. But it was enough, and when Hannah went to bed that night, she cried for her Grace, for the first time in a year and a half, and it wasn't the drowning kind of crying anymore. It was the kind that lets a little water out so the rest doesn't burst the dam. The pies started going to town, and the town's cruelty came right back at her. The first church social, Hannah loaded a wagon with 6 pies and rode in with Luke and Noah, and the second she set up her table, the whispers started. She heard the word from a knot of women near the lemonade. The Walker woman. The one Alma Pruitt says has designs. Fat as a spring heifer, look at her, and she thinks she'll bag a widower with fresh grief. Ought to be ashamed. Hannah heard every word. She'd heard the same words her whole life. She kept setting out her pies. But Luke heard them too. And Luke Walker, the joker, the boy who'd hid his grief behind a laugh for 14 months, went very quiet in a way Hannah had never seen. He walked over to the knot of women. He took off his hat. And in a voice that carried across the whole social pleasant as Sunday, he said, "Ladies, I want to thank you, all of you, for the year my mother was dying, And the year after she was gone, when my 10-year-old brother forgot what a hot supper tasted like, and I was cooking river rocks and calling it bread, not one of you fine churchwomen set foot on our place with so much as a biscuit. Not one. You prayed for us real loud in the pews, I'll give you that. But you let us starve." He put his hat back on. This woman walked in off the road with a coin and a bag and made my brother laugh for the first time in a year. "So you go right on whispering. But you'll do it while you're eating her pie, because I notice you all bought a slice and it's the best thing on this table and you know it." He turned and walked back to Hannah's table. The social had gone dead silent. And then old Mrs. Cobb, whose husband Pruitt had squeezed off his water, walked up to Hannah's table, loud enough for the whole yard to hear, and said, "I'll take 2 pies, Mrs. Brooks, and I'll thank you to save me 2 more next Sunday. My Elias always said you could measure a person by how they treat folks who can't pay them back. I've been watching how this county treated the Walkers." She looked around the yard hard. "I've been watching all of it." She paid for her pies and carried them off with her head high and one by one shamefaced. Other women came to the table, and by the end of the social, every pie was sold. And Hannah rode home with an empty wagon, and Luke sitting beside her, quiet, until they were a mile out of town. "You didn't have to do that," Hannah said. "In front of everybody. Those women'll make your life hard now. Let 'em." Luke was quiet a moment. Then, not joking, the realest she'd ever heard him. "You know why I make jokes all the time since Ma?" "Tell me." "'Cause the second I stop, I can hear her not being here. The quiet. So I keep it loud. All the time. So I don't have to hear the quiet." He looked at his hands. "You've been in our house a month, and it's the first time it hasn't been quiet. Even when nobody's talking. It's not empty quiet anymore. It's just quiet. There's a difference, and I don't know how to say it right." "You said it right," Hannah said softly. "So when those women called you what they called you," Luke's jaw tightened so like his father's, "I couldn't let it stand, because you're the reason it's not empty anymore. And I'd fight the whole county before I'd let them make it empty again." Hannah drove the wagon and didn't trust herself to speak, and beside her, Noah had fallen asleep against her arm, with the silver coin clutched in his fist, and Luke stared at the road. And for a while the 3 of them rode home in the good kind of quiet, the kind with somebody in it. But the debt was still $1,400, and September was still coming, and the pies and the hides and the squeezed dollars were 100 here and 40 there. And Hannah knew, lying awake in the storage room doing the sums over and over, that it wouldn't be enough. She found out just how short it would fall the day Daniel and Nathan drove a cut of steers to the railhead to sell. They'd picked out 40 head, the best of the young stock, meaning to bring back $400 in hard cash toward the note. Daniel had done the sum a dozen times at the table. 40 steers at a fair price was $400. $400 was a wall against September. They came home with 190. Hannah knew it the second the wagon came in from the set of Daniel's back. He didn't come inside. He went to the barn, and Hannah found him there standing over the empty stock trailer with his hat in his hands. "How much?" she said. 190, he said it flat. "For 40 head worth twice that. The buyer at the railhead Coombs, he's bought my beef 8 years. Fair man. Today he wouldn't look me in the eye. Said the market was soft. Said it 3 times, wouldn't meet my eye once." Daniel's jaw worked. On the drive home, Nathan figured it. Coombs banks with Harlan Pruitt. Owes him same as me. And a man who owes Harlan Pruitt buys his cattle at whatever price Pruitt tells him to, or Harlan calls his note to. He set his hat down slow. He's reached into the railhead, Hannah. He's fixed it so I can't sell my own beef for what it's worth. He means to starve me of every dollar between here and September, so there's nothing to reach 1,400 with but the creek. Hannah felt the trap close in the pit of her stomach. "He's cheating," she said. "He's banking. There's no law against a banker leaning on his own debtors. It's just business." That's what he'll say, smiling, if you put it to him. Just business. Daniel braced both hands on the trailer rail and dropped his head. "I can't outsell him, Hannah. He owns the price. I can't outbid him, he owns the money. And I can't fight him because the second I do, he calls the note early on some technicality and takes it all instead of just the creek. He's got me every way a man can be got." Nathan came into the barn behind them. He'd heard. His young face had gone hard and old. "There's gotta be a way," Nathan said. "There's always a way. Hannah, you found $40 in the ledger nobody else saw. Find us a way." Hannah looked at the two of them, the father beaten flat, the son refusing to be, and she made herself a promise she didn't yet know how to keep. "A man who cheats this careful," she said slowly, "keeps books. He has to. Every dollar he squeezed out of the Hendersons, out of Old Man Cobb, out of Coombs at the railhead. It's written down somewhere because a cheat this organized can't carry it all in his head. Men like Harlan Pruitt always leave a paper trail because their whole game is paper, notes and liens and terms." She looked at Daniel. "We're not going to outsell him, or outbid him, or outfight him. We're going to outdocument him. But not tonight. Tonight we do the sums, and we hold on, and we don't let him see he's got us scared. A man like that feeds on the scared. So we don't feed him. Come inside, both of you. Supper's hot and a family fights better fed." But the debt was still $1,400, and September was still coming, and the pies and the hides and the squeezed dollars were 100 here and 40 there, and Hannah knew, lying awake in the storage room doing the sums over and over, that it wouldn't be enough. Not near enough. They'd find 600-700 working themselves to the bone. And Harlan Pruitt would take the creek anyway, because that was how men like Pruitt won, by naming a number a good family couldn't reach, and then wearing a sorrowful face while they took the water. She hadn't told anyone that. She'd let the family have their fight because a family needs a fight to become a family. But she lay awake with the true sum, and she knew. Then Samuel changed everything, and he did it without meaning to. The boy had been getting better, eating more. Hannah had kept her word slow. She'd befriended him quiet mornings, the two of them. The first one's up, and she'd been waiting for the right moment to keep the other promise. The big one about his mother, about the doctor, about the 4 hours he'd carried on his back for 14 months. The moment came the night Doc Reeves rode out for Noah's fever. It was a small fever, nothing dangerous, but Noah was the baby, and the house went tight with old terror at the word, because the last time a walker took a fever, she'd gone in the ground. Doc Reeves came out and looked Noah over and said it was nothing. A summer chill keep him warm, and let Hannah's broth do the rest. And as the doctor packed his bag to go, Hannah caught him at the door. "Doc," she said low. "A word. Private." She took him aside, and she told him about Samuel, about the 4 hours, about the boy who'd gotten lost fetching him 14 months ago and had believed ever since that his lostness had killed his mother. Doc Reeves went very still. "That boy thinks that," he said. "All this time. He does. Nobody ever told him different. I think nobody knew he thought it. He's carried it alone. Doc." Hannah's voice caught. "You were there. At the end. I need to know the truth of it, whatever it is, because I promised that boy I'd find him the truth, and I don't break promises. Would 4 hours have saved her?" Doc Reeves set down his bag. "Get the boy," he said quietly. "He should hear this from me." They woke Samuel. He came down the stairs frightened, sure someone had died, and when he saw the doctor, his face went white as the day Hannah had first said the word "mother" in the yard. "Sit down, son," Doc Reeves said. "I've got something to tell you, and I should have told you a year ago, and I'm sorry I didn't, because I didn't know you needed to hear it." He sat across from the boy. "Your mother had a growth. Inside her. It had been there a long time, long before she took to bed. By the night she died, it had done its work. I've been a doctor 30 years, Samuel. There was nothing to be done. Not by me. Not by any doctor in the territory. Not if you'd fetched me in 4 hours or 4 minutes." Samuel's whole body had gone rigid. "But if I'd been faster—" "No." Doc Reeves leaned forward. "Listen to me, boy, because I need you to hear it in the right order. You did not get lost and lose your mother. Your mother was already lost before you ever saddled that horse. There was no version of that night where you rode fast enough. None. And I'll tell you something else." His voice gentled. I sat with her at the end. And you know what she asked me over and over while you were gone? She asked me, was Samuel back yet? Was he safe? She was afraid you'd get lost in the dark and hurt yourself hurrying. Her last worry on this earth, son, was for you, not blame. Worry. Love. She died loving you and scared for you, not 1 ounce of blame in her, and I have carried that not telling you for a year, and I am ashamed of it. Samuel Walker made a sound like something tearing. 14 months of a weight no child should carry came off him all at once, and he folded over the table and sobbed. And this time Hannah did gather him up, because now she had the right, and she held him while he shook apart, and came back together and across the room. Daniel stood with tears running plain down his face, and Doc Reeves looked at the floor, and even Nathan in the doorway had his hand over his mouth. "It wasn't me," Samuel kept saying into Hannah's shoulder. "It wasn't me. It wasn't me." "It was never you, sweetheart," Hannah said over and over, rocking him. "It was never ever you." When it was done, when Samuel had cried himself hollow and gone up to a sleep deeper than any he'd had in a year, Doc Reeves stood in the yard with his horse and looked at Hannah for a long time. "Alma Prewitt," he said finally, "has been telling this whole county you're a fortune hunter with designs on a grieving man's ranch. I know it. I've doctored this valley 30 years. I know what a fortune hunter looks like." He mounted his horse. "And I know what I just watched in there. You take care of that family, Mrs. Brooks. And you tell Daniel Walker that Elijah Reeves said if he ever needs a man in this valley to stand up and say what kind of woman you are, he knows where I live." He touched his hat, a real courtesy, the kind Prewitt only ever counterfeited. "Good night." He rode off into the dark. Hannah stood in the yard and watched him go, and Daniel came out and stood beside her, close the way he did now, and neither of them said anything for a long while. "You kept your promise to that boy," Daniel said at last. "You said you'd find him the truth. You did." "I keep my promises," Hannah said. "I told you that the first night." "You did." Daniel was quiet. Then, "Hannah, that storage room." "You keep saying that. I keep meaning it, and I keep not knowing how to say the rest." He turned to her in the dark. "A person who does what you did in there tonight, who digs up a boy's whole life and hands it back to him healed. That person shouldn't sleep in a room that smells of flour and mouse behind dry goods shelves. I've been thinking on it a long time, longer than I've let on." "It's got a door that latches," Hannah said, and her voice wasn't quite steady. "You gave me that yourself. It's the finest thing anybody gave me in a year and a half. Don't you go making it less than it was." Daniel Walker looked at her a moment longer. "No," he said soft. "I'd never make it less. But I could make it more." He didn't explain what he meant. He touched the brim of his hat, and he went in to check on Samuel. And Hannah stood alone in the yard, with the words turning over in her chest. I could make it more, and she told herself it was nothing. A man rambling after a hard night, and she believed that about as much as she'd believed she'd stopped wanting a family, which was to say not at all, though she'd have died before admitting it. She went to bed in the storage room that smelled of flour and mouse behind the door that latched, and for the first time in 18 months, she fell asleep before her head was rightly on the pillow, because a house full of people she loved was breathing safe on the other side of the wall. And a woman who'd walked 400 miles to find that had earned the right to sleep the whole night through. The blow came on a Sunday the way the worst blows always did. Hannah hadn't wanted to go to church. She'd have sooner baked all morning. But Noah had taken her hand at breakfast and said, "You have to come. Everybody comes, you're everybody now." And there was no arguing with a sentence like that from a boy with runny eggs on his chin, so she'd put on her one good dress and ridden in with the family, all 8 of them crowded into the wagon. And she'd walked up the church steps beside Daniel Walker like she had a right to. She found out real quick that a good part of the county thought she didn't. They were 3 pews from the front when Alma Prewitt stood up. Right there in the house of God in front of the whole congregation, she stood up and turned around and said loud enough to carry to the back wall, "Reverend, before we begin, I wonder if it's fitting. That's all. I only wonder if it's fitting that a grown woman with no husband and no people should be living under the roof of a widower and his sons sleeping in his house, going about as though she were something she is not and has no lawful claim to be. I raise it out of Christian concern. For those boys, for the memory of dear Mary, who I'm sure would not have wanted her home turned into a situation. The word situation hung in the church like smoke. Hannah felt every eye in the place swing to her. She felt the old heat crawl up her neck, the weighing the arithmetic, and she made herself sit still and keep her chin level because she'd sat through worse than Alma Pruitt in worse rooms than this. But beside her, Daniel started to rise. Hannah put her hand on his arm. Hard. "Don't," she breathed. "You'll only give her the fight she came for. Sit." Daniel sat, but his jaw was iron, and it was Nathan, quiet, careful Nathan, who stood up instead. 22 years old in his one good shirt, and he turned to face Alma Pruitt across the pews, and his voice didn't shake. "Mrs. Pruitt," Nathan said, "you want to talk about what my mother would have wanted. All right, my mother would have wanted her boys fed. She'd have wanted the youngest one to laugh again. She'd have wanted somebody in that house who knew how to love us, since our own father was drowning too hard to do it alone. Mrs. Brooks did all of that in 2 months. So you'll forgive me if I don't take instruction on my dead mother's wishes from a woman who never once brought us so much as a loaf of bread while we starved." He looked around the church. "My mother's memory is doing just fine. It's yours I'd worry about, ma'am, if I were you." He sat back down. A silence rang through the church, and then Hannah heard it. Small at first. Old Mrs. Cobb, 3 rows back, started to clap. Just her. Slow. And then another pair of hands. And another. Not the whole church. Not near the whole church. But enough. Enough that Alma Pruitt's face went blotched and ugly, and she sat down hard, and the Reverend cleared his throat and started the service like nothing had happened. Hannah should have felt triumph. She didn't. She rode home with the family, and she laughed at Luke's jokes, and she made a fine Sunday dinner, and all the while, a cold and familiar thing was setting up in her chest, the thing that had moved her out of a dozen houses ahead of the moment. Somebody made her go. Because Alma Pruitt had said one true thing in all her poison. She'd set a situation, and she was right that it was one. A grown woman sleeping in a widower's house was a scandal in a small county, and no amount of Nathan standing up in church would change that, and the scandal wouldn't land on Hannah. It would land on Daniel, on the boys, on the name they'd have to carry in this valley long after Hannah was just a story. That was the thing Alma Pruitt had understood and used and been right about. Hannah did the sum the way she did every sum, cold and honest, lying awake that night in the storage room. Pruitt wanted the creek. Alma wanted Hannah gone. And as long as Hannah stayed, she handed the Pruitts a weapon, the situation to use against a family that already had a banker's boot on its neck. Every day she stayed made Daniel's fight harder. Every day she stayed, the town had one more reason to side with Harlan when September came. A woman who loved this family would take the weapon out of Alma Pruitt's hand. There was only one way to do that. Hannah lay in the dark and made the coldest decision of her life, and she made it the way she'd made every decision like it before. Quiet, alone, with no goodbye to give anybody a chance to talk her out of it. She'd leave. Not run off in shame she'd done nothing to be ashamed of. She'd leave clean on her own feet before the situation cost the Walkers their good name and their creek both. She'd been in that house 2 months. She'd taught the boys to laugh. She'd given Benjamin his voice and Samuel his mother back and Jacob a place to put his love. They'd be all right now, better than she'd found them. That would have to be enough because it was all she was going to get. She started packing her canvas bag before dawn. She was 3 things into it: her spare dress, her needle case, the little pine meadowlark Benjamin had carved when the door eased open, and Noah stood there in his nightshirt with the silver coin in his fist. "What are you doing?" Noah said. Hannah's hands went still. "Nothing, honey. Go back to bed." "You're packing." The boy's voice climbed. "You said you don't break promises. You said—" "Noah." She crouched down. "Listen to me. You're leaving 'cause of that lady in church." His face was coming apart. You're leaving 'cause she said mean things, and now you're gonna go like everybody said you would. Like Pa said you might, and you promised. I'm not leaving today, Hannah said, and God forgive her, it was half a lie because she'd meant to leave that very night. I'm not leaving today. Now hush, you'll wake the house. Give me your hand. She folded his fingers back over the coin the way she had before. You hold on to that, and you go back to bed, and you don't say a word about my bag to anybody because a woman's allowed to keep her things packed if she wants. That's not leaving. That's just being ready. Now go on. The boy went. But he went slow looking back, and Hannah knew he didn't believe her, and she knew she'd have to go that night before he told the others, and she pressed her hand over her mouth so the crying wouldn't carry, because the hardest thing she'd ever done was tie up that bag, and the second hardest was lying to a 10-year-old to do it. She got through the day somehow. She made the meals. She kept her face right. And in the middle of the afternoon, Daniel came in and said, Hannah, we're short on stove wood, and the creek barrel's low. Take the little wagon down and fill the barrel, would you, and cut through the Hendersons on the way back for that hay money they owe. It'll take you till supper. It was the kind of errand that got a body out of the house for 3-4 hours. Hannah didn't think twice about it. She was glad of it, if anything. Glad of a reason to be away, to gather herself, to figure the words she'd leave in a note, since she couldn't say them to their faces. She took the wagon. She filled the barrel. She collected the Hendersons' hay money, $11 that she set aside in her mind for the creek fund she wouldn't be here to see finished. It was on the county road halfway home that Harlan Pruitt's buggy came the other way and stopped square in the middle of the road so she couldn't pass. He didn't get down. He sat up on his fine leather seat and looked at her on the wagon board like a man who'd been waiting for exactly this. Mrs. Brooks, on your own, I see. Good. I've been hoping for a word without Daniel standing in front of you like a bull in a gate. I've got wood to get home before dark, Mr. Pruitt. Move your buggy. I'll be brief. He folded his soft hands. You're a practical woman. I can see it. A woman who ran a chuck wagon, who keeps a ledger, who does sums. So let me talk to you in sums, since Daniel's too proud to hear them. That family owes my bank $1,400 come September. They cannot pay it. You know that better than any of them, because you've done the arithmetic yourself, haven't you? I can see it on you. You know they'll lose the creek. Hannah said nothing, but something in her face must have moved because Pruitt smiled. There it is, he said. You do know. Now here's my sum. You are the reason that family has fight left in it. Before you came, Daniel Walker was a beaten man ready to sell out and go east. I had that ranch as good as bought. Then you show up and start baking pies and squeezing ledgers and standing them all up straight, and suddenly the man won't lie down. You've made this harder than it needed to be, Mrs. Brooks. And I don't like things made harder. He reached into his coat. He drew out a fold of banknotes thick and held them across the gap between the vehicles. $200. More money than you've had in your hand in your life, I'd wager. You take it, and you're gone from this county by morning. And I forget the situation Alma made such a scene about, and Daniel Walker keeps a little of his dignity in front of the church. Everybody's better for it, especially you. Hannah looked at the money. $200. It was true what he said. She'd never held that much at once. It was a fresh start in some far town where nobody knew her size or her graves. It was exactly the kind of clean leaving she'd been planning since Sunday, and here was a man offering to pay her to do the thing she'd already decided to do. And that was the moment Hannah Brooks stopped planning to leave. She hadn't known it until Pruitt's money made her look at it plain. She'd been telling herself she'd go for love to take the weapon out of Alma's hand to spare the family. But Harlan Pruitt had just shown her the true shape of it. Her leaving wouldn't spare that family. Her leaving was the thing this man wanted most in the world, because her staying was the only reason they had a chance. Every sum she'd done in the dark had been Pruitt's sum planted in her by a Sunday's cruelty, and she'd near fallen for it. Mr. Pruitt, Hannah said, and her voice was very calm. You just made a mistake. I don't make mistakes about money, Mrs. Brooks. You made one just now. You told me I'm the reason they've got fight left. You meant it as a threat. She gathered her reins. But you just handed a woman with nothing the one thing she never had. You told her she matters. You told her that a soft-handed banker with a whole county in his pocket is scared enough of her pies and her ledgers to pay her $200 to quit. Mister, I'd sooner burn that money than take it, because now I know exactly what my staying is worth. It's worth $200 to you, which means it's worth everything to them. Now move your buggy, or I'll drive this wagon around you through the ditch and you can explain the mud to Alma. Harlan Pruitt's smile was gone entirely now. You'll regret this, he said, tucking the money away. I've regretted near everything I ever did, Hannah said. This won't make the list. Move. He moved. She drove past him and did not look back, and she drove the rest of the way home. Not rehearsing goodbye anymore, meaning it to be the first drive of the rest of her life, though she did not yet know how right she was or what waited for her up that road. The yard was too quiet when she pulled in. No boys. No Noah running out. She set the brake and climbed down and went inside, and the kitchen was empty, and she called out, "Daniel, boys!" And nobody answered, and a cold worry started in her, and she went down the little hall toward the storage room to set down her shawl. She stopped. The storage room door was gone. Not open. Gone. The whole flimsy plank door she'd latched every night for 2 months gone. And in its place, a real door, a proper hung door of new pine, and it stood open, and Hannah looked through it, and her legs went out from under her the way they had the first day in the yard. The storage room was gone. Where the dry goods shelves had stood, there were real walls now, planed boards, fitted tight no more, mouse holes and lard smell, and gray gone paint. Where the little painted shut window had been, there was a real window glass, clean, and it was open, and a breeze came through it, and hung across it were curtains. Blue curtains. And against the far wall was a bed, not a slack-roped cot, a bed, a real one. Pine, the wood still pale and new, the joints handmade and careful in a way she knew. In a way she'd have known anywhere, because she'd held enough of Benjamin's carving to know his hand. There was a wardrobe. Built-in, fitted to the corner, a real place to hang a dress instead of a nail. There was a little table beside the bed, and on the table set on a folded square of cloth was a fistful of wildflowers in the blue cup. Mary's blue cup, the pretty one, the precious one that lived up high, where small hands couldn't reach, taken down, and filled with flowers, and set beside a stranger's bed. Hannah stood in the doorway and could not breathe. Beside the flowers lay a key. A heavy iron key, the real kind, the kind that locks a real door. And under it weighted down a square of paper with writing on it, and Hannah's hands were shaking so hard she nearly couldn't lift it, and she read it, and the words were in a plain, hard hand that had not written many soft things in its life. Nobody who cares for this family should ever have to sleep like they're only passing through. Hannah Brooks broke. She'd held her crying private for 18 months. She'd had a rule, and the rule went to pieces right there in the doorway of a room that 6 boys and their father had torn down and built back up while she was away, filling a water barrel. And she pressed the note to her chest, and she sank down against the doorframe, and she wept, the way she had not let herself weep since the night she buried Grace. That was when she heard them. They'd been there the whole time. Out in the hall behind her, and around the corner, all 6 of them crowded up trying to see, and pretending they weren't, and now that she'd found it, there was no more pretending. Noah came first, of course, barreling into her, and then they were all there, and Hannah looked up through her tears at the ring of them, Nathan, Luke, Benjamin, Jacob, Samuel, Noah, every one of them watching her cry with the awkward, terrified pride of people who have done a good thing and don't know if it landed. "We did it while you were gone," Noah said, unnecessary thrilled. "The wood was Benjamin's, and the window was Nathan's, and Jacob did the walls, and Luke did the roof part, and me and Samuel picked the flowers, and Pa did all the hard parts, and we weren't supposed to say, but I'm saying. We built it while you were gone, so it'd be a surprise. The curtains were Ma's," Jacob said gruff from the back. "From her hope chest. They never got used. We figured she'd rather they got used than sat in a chest. So." "And the cup," Samuel said quietly. "The blue cup. We didn't ask, but we figured you'd know what it meant, that we got it down, that we let somebody use it." Then Benjamin stepped forward. Benjamin, who 2 months ago had not said a word in over a year, and who still spent his words like a poor man spends coin one at a time, and only when it counted. "I built the bed," Benjamin said. His voice was rough with how little he used it. "By lamp. 3 nights. I measured you." His ears went red. I mean I measured the door frame you stand in when you call us to supper. So it'd be long enough and wide enough. So you'd fit. So there'd be room." He looked at the floor. "A person ought to fit in their own bed, that's all. That's why I measured." And Hannah, who had spent 30 years being told in 100 small cruelties that she did not fit, did not fit. Chairs, doorways. Other people's ideas of a woman put her hand over her mouth because a mute boy had cut a bed by lamplight for 3 nights to make sure she would fit, and had said the word fit like it was the most ordinary word in the world, instead of the one that had cut her deepest her whole life. "I made the joints too tight on the first one," Benjamin added, quiet. "Had to start over. Ma taught me. Do it twice before you do it wrong once." "Your ma taught you right," Hannah managed. Luke, who could never let a silence get too heavy, said, "I did the roof over the window, which nobody's mentioned. I'd like the record to show I did carpentry and did not fall off the house, which for me is 2 miracles." Then the joke went out of him, and the real thing came through the way it did with Luke now. "I kept thinking the whole time I was up there about how you said the house wasn't empty quiet anymore. And I thought we're building her a room, and she's going to sleep in it, and hear us breathing through the wall, same as we've been hearing her. And it won't be empty quiet on either side of that wall ever again." He cleared his throat hard. "So, that's why the roof's a little crooked. I was crying some. Up on the roof. Don't tell anybody." "The window latches from the inside," Nathan said. He'd been standing back the oldest, always the last, to reach for a thing. "I set it so it latches from the inside, and the door too. Pa said give her a door that latches first day, so I made sure it does. But I fixed it so it locks from your side only." He met her eyes, and his own were bright. "So nobody can ever lock you out of it, and nobody can ever lock you in. It's yours, all the way yours. That's the one thing I wanted to build, a room a person can't be put out of." Hannah couldn't speak. She looked from face to face, and she thought of the bag. The bag tied up under the cot. The bag she'd packed at dawn to leave these 6 boys before they could be shamed by her staying. And a fresh wave of it hit her worse than the first, because she understood now what these children had been doing while she was doing sums about how to abandon them the right way. Daniel came down the hall last. He stopped a little back from the boys. He had sawdust in his gray hair and a hammer still in his hand, like he'd forgotten to set it down, and he looked at Hannah crying on the floor of the room he'd built her, and he didn't come any closer, and he didn't smile, and when he spoke his voice was quiet enough that it was almost only for her. "You asked for a corner," Daniel Walker said. "The first day. You knelt in my yard and buried your last coin and asked for a corner where nobody'd run you off before sunrise." He turned the hammer once in his hand. "We thought you deserved a home." Hannah put her face in her hands. "I was going to leave," she said. The words fell into the hall, and the boys went still. "I have to tell you," Hannah said, and she made herself look up, made herself say it to their faces because they'd earned the truth, and she was done leaving people to find out later. "After church, after what that woman said, I did the sum the way I always do, and it came out that as long as I stayed, I was a weapon in Alma Prewitt's hand. A scandal you'd have to carry. One more reason for the town to side with Harlan come September. And I thought a woman who loves this family takes the weapon away. So I packed my bag this morning. It's under the cot. It's tied up right now. I was going to leave you a note tonight and be gone before you woke, so you wouldn't have to be ashamed of me another day." She drew a breath. "And then something happened on the road home tonight that you all have to hear, because it's the reason I walked in that door already knowing I couldn't go, before I ever laid eyes on the room." Daniel's head came up. "What happened on the road?" Harlan Pruitt stopped his buggy square across it and held out $200 in cash to be gone from this county by morning. The hall went dead silent. "He said I'm the reason you've still got fight in you. Said before I came you were near ready to sell out and go east, and he had this place as good as bought, and then I showed up and stood you all up straight and made it hard. He said it like a threat. Hannah's voice steadied. But I sat there looking at his money, and I finally understood the sum I'd been doing wrong all week. My leaving was never going to spare this family. My leaving is the one thing that man wants most on this earth. He'd pay $200 for it. Which means my staying is worth everything to you. And near nothing in my whole life was ever worth everything to anybody before. So I told him I'd sooner burn his money, and I drove home meaning to unpack that bag with my own 2 hands. Her voice broke. And then I walked in and found you'd already unpacked my whole life into a room before I could even tell you I'd changed my mind. Nobody moved. Then Noah in a very small voice. That's why you were packing. You lied to me. I lied to you, Noah. I'm sorry. It was the worst thing I ever did, and I did it because I thought it was love. Hannah wiped her face. And I was wrong. I stood in that doorway just now, and I saw what you all did while I was gone, and I finally understood what a fool I've been. You weren't ashamed of me. You built me a door that locks and hung your mother's curtains and took down her cup. You didn't build a room for somebody who's passing through. You built a room for somebody who stays. Her voice cracked all the way through. And I've spent my whole life leaving before I could be left. Getting good at goodbye so nobody could hurt me with it. And you 6 went and did the one thing I had no defense against. You made it so I can't leave. Because a woman can walk away from a corner. She cannot walk away from a home. Daniel finally set the hammer down. He crossed the hall. He crouched in front of her the way she was always crouching in front of his sons, and he took her hand right there in front of all 6 boys, no half-inch on a porch rail this time, and he held it. Then don't, he said. Don't walk away. Let the town talk. Let Alma stand up in every church between here and Miles City. I've buried a wife, and near buried my own boys in grief, and I am done. Hannah, I am plumb done. Letting other people's opinions cost my family the things it needs to live. You are a thing this family needs to live, so I'll make it right in the eyes of anybody whose eyes matter, in whatever way the law and the church require when you're ready and not 1 minute before. But the situation Alma Prewitt's so worried about, I mean to fix it by making it no situation at all. You understand what I'm telling you. Hannah understood. She understood it was as close to a proposal as a grieving proud man could come while crouched on a hall floor with sawdust in his hair and 6 sons watching. And she understood he was leaving her the room to say no, and she understood she wasn't going to. Not tonight, Hannah said, and she was almost laughing through the tears now. Don't you ask me the whole of it tonight, Daniel Walker on the floor with these children watching and me looking like I've been crying for an hour, which I have. A woman's got to have one thing in her life she gets asked proper. All right, Daniel said. And there was something in his face she'd never seen there. Something young. Something that had been buried 14 months and had just now dug itself out. Then I'll ask you proper, later, when you're not crying and I've washed the sawdust out of my hair. All right then, Hannah said. All right then, Daniel said. And Noah, who had been holding it in as long as a 10-year-old could hold, anything burst out. Does that mean she's staying? Is she staying? Somebody just say if she's staying. I'm staying, Hannah said. And she caught him up, and she caught up as many of them as her arms would hold, and the ones her arms wouldn't hold crowded in close anyway, and Daniel put his arms around the whole tangle of them, and for a moment the 8 of them were just one thing in the hall, one breathing knotted thing that had lost too much and found its way to enough. Then Jacob of all of them pulled back and scrubbed his face hard and said rough, "The bag. Give me the bag. I'm not having a packed bag under that bed one more night. It's bad luck. I don't want to look at it." And he went in and dragged out the canvas bag from under the new pine bed, and he started pulling Hannah's things out of it and putting them away. Her spare dress into the built-in wardrobe. Her needle case onto the little table by the flowers. The pine meadowlark onto the windowsill where the light would catch it. Putting a stranger's life away into a room like he was nailing her down to the earth so she couldn't drift off it. And the other boys pitched in, and Hannah stood there and let them unpack the bag she'd packed to leave. And she did not stop them, and she never packed it again. When the boys had finally gone to bed, herded off by Nathan high and giddy and refusing to sleep, Noah crowing all the way up the stairs. Hannah and Daniel stood together in the doorway of the room. They worked 3 days on it, Daniel said. In secret, whenever you were baking or in town. Benjamin Neer didn't sleep cutting the bed by lamp, so it'd be done. Jacob's the one thought of the curtains, though he'll never let you say so. It was his idea, the curtains and the cup. He came to me and he said, "Pa, she notices everything. She notices what things mean, so we've got to give her something that means something. From a boy who couldn't say a kind word to you for a month." Daniel shook his head slow. "You did that. You turned my angriest son into the one who thought of the curtains." "I didn't. If you say you just cracked the eggs one more time," Daniel said, "I will lose my patience with you, Hannah Brooks." But he was almost smiling. "Take the credit, just once. You've earned it, and I want to watch you do it." Hannah looked at the room, the blue curtains moving in the breeze, Mary's cup full of wildflowers. The bed a mute boy had built by lamplight, so a woman he'd known 2 months wouldn't sleep like she was temporary. The iron key on the table. The note that said, "Nobody who cares for this family should ever have to sleep like they're only passing through." "All right," she said quietly. "I did it. I loved them back to life, all 6 of them and their fool father, too." Her voice went thick. "There. Is that what you wanted?" "That's exactly what I wanted." Daniel touched her face one hand brief, the way a man touches a thing he still can't quite believe is his to touch. Then he stepped back, because 6 boys were sleeping thin-walled down the hall. And a proud man keeps a proper distance until the thing is done right. "Good night, Hannah," he said. "Sleep in your room, the real one. Turn that key in the lock if you want to, though I don't reckon you'll feel the need to anymore." He went, and Hannah Brooks stood alone in the room her family had built her while she was away planning to leave them. She ran her hand along the pine bed Benjamin had cut by lamplight. She touched the blue curtains that had waited 14 months in a dead woman's hope chest for someone worth using them on. She lifted Mary's cup and breathed in the wildflowers 2 boys had picked, and she set it back exactly where they'd placed it. Then she picked up the iron key. She turned it in her hand a long time, the heavy, honest weight of it, the first key to the first door of the first room that had ever in all her 30 years been truly hers. She carried it to the door, and she looked down the dark hall toward the rooms where 6 boys and a man who was going to ask her proper lay sleeping safe, breathing alive hers. And Hannah Brooks left the door standing open. She set the key on the little table beside her bed, beside the flowers where she could see it in the morning light, and she lay down in the bed her family had built her, and for the first night in 18 years of running, she did not lie awake listening for the door. She had a door now, a real one, hung true on iron hinges by hands that loved her. It locked, and it locked from her side only. And she was never once going to need to use that lock, because she had finally, after 400 miles and 2 empty graves and more goodbyes than a heart is built to give, walked into the one house on God's earth she would never have to walk out of again. The trouble that changed everything didn't come in good harness. It came in the dry middle of an August night on a wind with the smell of smoke. Hannah woke to Nathan pounding on her new door. "Hannah, fire lightning strike out on the north range. It's coming, the wind's driving it straight for us." She was up and dressed before he finished. She threw open her door and the house was already awake. Boots on the stairs, lamps flaring, Daniel in the kitchen, yanking on his coat with his face gone to stone. "How bad?" Hannah said. "Bad." Daniel didn't waste a word. "It's in the grass. Wind's behind it. I've got maybe 2 hours before it's on the home place. The herd's between it and the creek. If I don't move them, they burn." He grabbed his hat. "Nathan, Luke, Jacob, Benjamin, you're with me. We ride now and push the cattle across the creek where the fire can't follow. Samuel, Noah, you stay." "They stay with me," Hannah said. "You take your 4 and save the herd. I'll hold the house." Daniel stopped. For 1/2 second the old thing flickered in him, the thing that had spent 14 months trusting nobody with what he loved. Hannah, if that fire jumps the draw, this house is gone and everything in it. Then I'd best get to work, hadn't I? She was already moving. Go, Daniel. Save your cattle. Trust me with the rest. You built me a room in this house. Let me earn it. Go. He went. He grabbed her by the shoulder, once hard on the way past the only goodbye there was time for. And then he and the 4 older boys were on horses and gone into the dark. And Hannah turned to the 2 she had left, Samuel 14 and Noah 10. Both of them white-faced, and she became something they'd never seen. Listen to me, both of you, and do exactly what I say, and don't argue, and we'll all be drinking coffee at that table by sunup. Her voice was flat, calm, and the calm of it steadied them like a hand on a bridle. Samuel, the well. I want every barrel, every bucket, every pot in this house filled with water and lined up on the porch. Go. Noah, you're with him hauling. Move. They moved. Hannah's mind ran ahead, like a chuckwagon cook's. Mind runs a supper for 30, everything at once, in order, no wasted step. She'd fought a grass fire before on the drive years ago. She knew the thing that killed a house wasn't the wall of flame. It was the sparks. The wind threw sparks a quarter-mile ahead of the fire, and they landed on a dry shake roof, and that was that. Samuel, she called. When those barrels are full, the ladder up to the roof, and you soak every shingle you can reach. Noah keeps the buckets coming up to you. The roof stays wet, the house lives. You understand me. The roof is the whole ball game. Yes, ma'am, Samuel said, and there wasn't a boy's tremble in it. There was a man's. She did the rest herself fast. The important things, the irreplaceable things she'd already worked out in her head weeks ago without meaning to, the way she worked out everything, where every precious thing in that house lived. Mary's Bible, with the children's births written in it. The strongbox from under Daniel's bed with the deed and the loan papers and every receipt he'd ever paid Harlan Pruitt. She took them out to the middle of the plowed garden, where nothing could burn, wrapped in oilcloth, buried shallow, marked with a hoe stuck upright. Then the food the winter would still come whether the fire did or not, and a family can't eat a saved house. She hauled the smoked meat and the flour and the preserves she'd put up all summer out to the root cellar, and shut the earth door over them because earth doesn't burn. She was dragging the last flour sack when the neighbors started coming. They came on the same wind that brought the fire, because a grass fire in August is every rancher's fire. It doesn't stop at a fence line. Old Man Cobb came first, and 2 of his hands. Then the Hendersons. Then men. Hannah didn't know from spreads down the valley, all of them arriving with wet sacks and shovels, and no plan milling in the yard, looking for somebody to tell them what to do, and the only person in that yard was a woman. They'd half of them heard called a fortune hunter in church. They looked at her, and for 1 second nobody moved. There's no time for you to decide whether to take orders from me, Hannah said loud, cutting across the milling. So I'll make it easy. Anybody with a better plan, speak now. Nobody spoke. Then here it is. That fire's coming up the draw. If it climbs out of the draw, it's got a clean run at this house, and the barn, and every one of your spreads behind it. So it doesn't climb out of the draw. Mr. Cobb, take your men and every shovel and cut me a fire break along the top lip of that draw, bare dirt 3 feet wide, no grass all the way across. You Henderson's wet sacks, you beat out anything that lands this side of the break. The rest of you backfire. We burn a strip toward the draw ourselves, controlled on our terms, so when the big fire gets here, there's nothing left for it to eat. Go now. Go. They went. Hannah didn't stop to wonder at it that a yard full of men had just taken a battle plan from her without one word of argument. She didn't have time to wonder, because that was the moment Harlan Pruitt's buggy came up the road. He didn't get down. Of course he didn't. He sat up on his fine seat at the edge of the yard safe, and he watched the men digging his fire break, and Hannah crossed to him, because she had to, because there was one thing only Pruitt could give. Mr. Pruitt, the creek head gate. You control it downstream. If you open it full and let the water back up into the low draw, we can flood the bottom, and the fire dies there. It's the whole valley's best chance, not just mine. I need you to ride down and open that gate. Now." Pruitt looked down at her, and he smiled the smile she hated most. "That headgate," he said, "sits on land I hold the paper on. Opening it floods bottomland I could plant next spring. It's an expensive favor, Mrs. Brooks. Now, I'm not an unreasonable man. Tell Daniel Walker the Creek Quarter comes to me tonight, no more fuss, and I'll open my gate and save his house. Or don't, and let it burn and buy it off him cheap in the morning, either way. Your choice." His eyes glittered in the firelight. Business is business, even at night. The men had stopped digging. They'd heard. Old Man Cobb had heard standing there with his shovel cob whose water Pruitt had squeezed years ago. The Hendersons had heard. Every man in that yard fighting to save their own valley had heard Harlan Pruitt offer to let a family's house burn unless he got the water he'd been scheming after all summer. And something in the valley turned right there in the space of 10 seconds that had been a long time turning. "You'd let it burn," Old Man Cobb said slowly, loud. "You'd let the Walker place burn with children in it to steal a quarter section. That's what I just heard. Say I heard wrong, Harlan." Pruitt's smile faltered. "I said business. You said let it burn." Cobb dropped his shovel. He walked to his own wagon, and he came back with something, and it took Hannah a second to see it was a length of chain. "Boys," Cobb said to the yard, "the head gate's a mile down. I know where it is. I helped build it before this soft-handed thief bought the paper on it. We don't need his permission to save our own valley. We need a mile of ride and a chain to pull the pin." He looked at Pruitt. "You sit right there in your buggy, Harlan. You sit right there and watch honest men do the thing you tried to sell us. And come morning, this whole valley's going to know what you offered tonight. Every ranch you squeezed, every note you hold. We're going to know what kind of man's been holding our water." 2 men rode for the head gate, and Harlan Pruitt sat alone in his buggy at the edge of the yard, watching the firelight. And for the first time, Hannah saw fear on that soft face. Not fear of the fire, but fear of the thing Cobb had just named. The thing that could take down a man like Pruitt, faster than any flame, a whole valley of debtors who had just watched him show his true face all at once. But there was no time to savor it. The fire crowned the far lip of the draw. "Brake's not finished," a Henderson shouted. "There's a gap." "Then plug it." Hannah was already running. The gap was 40 feet of ungapped grass on the draw's lip, and the backfire hadn't reached it, and the main fire was coming, and if it poured through that gap, it had the house. She grabbed a wet sack. Cobb's hands grabbed shovels, and a knot of men and 1 woman threw themselves at 40 feet of dry August grass, with the fire close enough now to feel on their faces, digging, beating, tearing the grass out by the roots with their bare hands, where the shovels were too slow. "Ma'am!" It was Samuel on the roof screaming down. "The barn! Sparks on the barn! I can't reach it from here." Hannah's heart stopped. The barn. The horses were out with Daniel, but the barn was 40 feet from the house, and if it went, the house went with it. And Noah, 10-year-old Noah, was already running for the barn with a bucket. "Noah!" Hannah screamed. "No!" But the boy was fast, and the boy was scared, and the boy had something to prove, and he was inside the barn door, throwing water at the smoking loft when the wind gusted and a whole sheet of sparks came down, and the barn's dry hay caught with a sound like a held breath letting go. Hannah did not think. She dropped the sack and she ran, a heavy woman a whole county had called too slow, too big, too much, and she ran faster than she had ever run in her life, and she was through the barn door into the smoke, and she found the boy by his coughing, and she got him under her arm and she carried him out bodily as the loft came down behind them in a roar of fire out into the yard, and she went down on her knees with him clutched to her chest, both of them coughing alive. "You foolish, brave, foolish boy," she sobbed into his hair. Don't you ever. "The barn," Noah wheezed. "I couldn't save the barn. The barn's lumber. You're my boy. Lumber I can replace." She held him so tight he squeaked. "There's not another Noah Walker in the whole world, and I will burn the barn myself before I lose him, do you hear me?" And then the water came. It came up the draw in a black rushing sheet. Cobb's men had pulled the headgate pin a mile downstream, and the creek had backed up into the low ground, exactly as Hannah had said it would. And the flood met the fire in the bottom of the draw, and the fire died there, in a wall of steam and hiss and ruin, drowned in the water Harlan Pruitt had tried to sell them. The barn was lost. Nothing else was. The house stood wet-roofed and whole because a 14-year-old boy had soaked its shingles all night long. The food was safe in the earth, the deed and the papers were safe in the garden, and the fire that should have taken the whole home place and half the valley behind it, sat drowned and steaming in the draw, beaten by a firebreak and a backfire and a flooded creek by a plan a woman had called out in a burning yard, while men twice her size stood waiting to be told what to do. Daniel came back at dawn. He came back filthy and hollow-eyed, having pushed 400 head of cattle across the creek in the dark and saved everyone, and he rode into the yard, braced for ashes. And he found his house standing. He found his neighbors leaning on their shovels, exhausted and alive. He found his youngest son wrapped in a blanket, coughing and grinning. And he found Hannah Brooks sitting on the porch step, black with smoke, head to foot. Her good dress ruined, her hands blistered, holding Noah against her side. He got down off his horse. He looked at the drowned draw and the wet roof and the lost barn and the men, and he understood in one long look what had happened in the hours he was gone. "Somebody tell me," Daniel said, and his voice wasn't steady, "how my house is still standing." And Old Man Cobb, who Pruitt had squeezed dry years ago, who'd had no cause to love anybody, took off his hat and said loud, so the whole yard heard it, "Your woman Walker, your woman happened. Cut a firebreak set, a backfire flooded the draw, ran the whole fight like a trail boss and never raised her voice once. Pulled your boy out of a burning barn with her own 2 hands." Cobb turned his hat in his fingers. "I've lived in this valley 40 years. I've watched this county say ugly things about that woman since the day she come. Called her lazy for her size. Called her a fortune hunter in church." He looked around the yard hard at faces that couldn't meet his. "Well, I watched her save 8 houses tonight, counting all of ours downwind. I'll not hear another ugly word about her as long as I live, and I'll knock down any man who says one in front of me. That plain enough." Nobody said an ugly word. Instead, one by one, they came to her. The Hendersons first. Then Cobb's hands. Then men she'd never met from spreads down the valley, taking off their hats, tipping their hats the way the West says the deepest thing it knows how to say to a woman on a porch step covered in smoke. "Ma'am, ma'am. Obliged, ma'am. You saved my place tonight, and you never even knew my name." And a woman came up the steps that Hannah hadn't expected, a churchwoman, one of the not from the social, one of the ones who'd said fat as a spring heifer, where Luke could hear. She stood in front of Hannah with her mouth working, and she didn't have a fine speech, she just had the truth, and she said it plain. "I said a terrible thing about you. At the social. I don't reckon you heard it, but I said it, and my boy's alive this morning because you flooded that draw, and I've got to live with having said it." Her voice cracked. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Brooks. I'm sorry, and I'm ashamed, and I brought you nothing but a wet sack tonight, and you saved my whole family with it. That's all. I had to say it." Hannah looked up at her. And Hannah, who had carried 30 years of that woman's kind of words, who had every right on God's earth to send her off cold, reached up with a blistered hand and took the woman's hand instead. "You came when the fire did," Hannah said quietly. "You dug, and you beat back sparks all night alongside the rest. That's what I'll remember, not the other. Go home to your boy." The woman broke down entirely and had to be led off by another, and Hannah watched her go, and she felt something settle in her chest that she had not felt in her whole life. Not once. Not in any town or church or ranch in 400 miles of walking. Doc Reeves rode in as the light came up, bag already in his hand because somebody's boy had ridden for him in the night. He went straight to Noah first, listened to the boy's chest, made him cough, pronounced the lungs would mend. Then he took Hannah's blistered hands in his and turned them over, the way Daniel would an hour later, and his jaw tightened. "Barn burns," he said. "You went in after the boy." "Somebody had to. I told you once," Doc Reeves said, wrapping the first hand slow and careful, that if Daniel Walker ever needed a man in this valley to stand up and say what kind of woman you are, he knew where I live. He tied off the bandage. He looked up at her, and his old eyes were wet. I don't reckon he'll need me to now. I reckon the whole county said it for him tonight. But I'll say it anyway, so it's on the record from a man who's doctored every family here for 30 years. He raised his voice so the yard could hear it. There is not a finer woman in this territory than the one sitting on this porch step. And any soul who ever said different can come argue it with Elijah Reeves. He went back to her hands. Now hold still. You've earned a good long rest, and I mean to see you take it. She felt seen. Not pitied. Not weighed. Not tolerated for her usefulness and forgotten. Seen for exactly what she was, strength and courage, and a quick, cold mind under fire, in a body a county had spent months deciding didn't count. They'd found out in one night that it counted, that it had always counted, that the woman inside it had been worth 10 of the ones who'd judged her the whole time. Daniel came and sat down on the step beside her in the ash and the dawn, and he didn't say anything for a while. He just took her blistered hand careful and turned it over and looked at the burns from the barn. You went into a burning barn, he said finally. For Noah. I did. You could have died. So could he. Hannah leaned her head against Daniel's shoulder, too tired to hold it up, too tired to care who saw. But he didn't, and the house didn't, and your cattle didn't, and your creek's still yours. Daniel and half this valley just watched Harlan Pruitt offer to let your house burn for it. I don't reckon that man's going to have his easy way in this county much longer, not after tonight. A valley remembers a thing like that. Daniel looked out at the drowned draw, at the neighbors gathering their tools, at his own house, standing whole in the gray light with a wet roof, and a 14-year-old asleep, sitting up against the chimney, having soaked those shingles till dawn and earned the sleep of a man. No, Daniel said slowly. No, I don't reckon he will. Then he turned and looked at the woman leaning smoke-black and blistered against his shoulder. The woman who'd walked into his yard with a coin and a bag, and asked for nothing but a corner, and who had just held his whole world together with her two bare hands while it tried to burn. Hannah, he said. When you're not covered in ash, and I've had some sleep, and your hands are healed. His voice had gone rough and careful, the voice of a man laying down the last of a wall he'd been building brick by brick all summer. I've got a proper question to ask you. The whole of it. The one I said I'd ask. Hannah didn't lift her head from his shoulder, but he felt her smile against it. I reckon I'll be here, she said. I've got a room. It locks and everything. And the sun came up over the Walker Ranch, over the wet roof and the drowned fire and the lost barn and the gathered neighbors, over 8 people who had lost more than a family should, and had just in one hard night been made whole in the eyes of a whole valley, and over a woman who had spent her entire life being looked past, sitting on a porch step at last where every soul in the county could see her plain and knew finally and forever exactly what she was worth. The proper question had to wait on Hannah's hands to heal, and while they healed, the whole valley did Harlan Pruitt's arithmetic for him. It started the morning after the fire when Old Man Cobb rode into town, walked into Pruitt's bank, and closed his account. Every dollar. Cash on the barrelhead. And on his way out, he stopped in the doorway loud enough for the whole street and told any soul in earshot exactly what Harlan Pruitt had offered to do while children slept in a burning house. By noon, there were 3 more ranchers at the teller's window closing accounts. By the end of the week, there was a line. It's called a run. Nathan told the family at supper, and there was wonder in his young voice. When enough folks pull their money at once, a bank can't cover it. Pruitt's been lending out more than he's got in the vault for years, betting nobody'd ever all come at once. Well, they're all coming at once. But the run was only half of it. The other half was the strongbox. Hannah had it out on the kitchen table before her burns were even out of the bandages, and she went through it the way she went through everything cold and slow and complete. And on the 3rd night, she went very still over a page. Daniel, she said, come look at this. Bring the boy who reads numbers. Nathan came. Daniel came. And Hannah laid 2 papers side by side under the lamp. This is the note Mary signed, 1400 at 10% due in September. Legal hard, but legal. She tapped the second page. And these are your payment receipts, every one you've kept, now. You've paid this man for 4 years faithful, and I sat down and totted up every payment against what a 10% note should have come down to. She looked up. Daniel, he's been charging you 12, not 10. 12. Written 10 on the note and collected 12 at the window year over year, banking that a grieving man raising 6 boys would never sit down and check the sum. You've overpaid him near $300 across 4 years. It's right here, in his own hand, on his own receipts. The kitchen went dead quiet. That's cheating, Nathan breathed. That's fraud, Hannah said. And it's the kind you can prove because he wrote it down himself, and a cheat who writes it down is a cheat who's finished. He did the same to Cobb, I'd bet money. To the Hendersons. To every debtor in this valley who trusted him not to check. She squared the papers. We're not going to fight him with fists or fire Daniel. We're going to fight him with his own receipts in front of the territorial marshal with old man Cobb and the Hendersons and Doc Reeves standing behind us. We're going to out-document him. I told you men like Pruitt always leave a paper trail. He left us a whole ledger of it. They rode to the county seat that Saturday. Daniel, Hannah Cobb, and Doc Reeves, and they laid the papers in front of the territorial marshal, and it was over faster than any of them dared hope. A banker facing a run on his vault, and a fraud charge, and a valley of ruined debtors all at once does not stand and fight. He folds. Harlan Pruitt signed away every crooked interest dollar he'd squeezed from the valley, forgave the padding and settled the Walker note at its honest balance, which after the $300 he'd overcharged was credited back, and the pie money and the hide money and a fair cattle price. Now that Coombs wasn't scared of him anymore, came to a number the family could reach. They reached it. Daniel Walker paid off his ranch free and clear with money the whole family had earned, and he kept his creek. Pruitt was gone from the county by first snow, Alma with him. Nobody saw them go, and nobody waved. You beat him, Daniel said to Hannah that night, still not quite believing it. A soft-handed banker with a whole county in his pocket, and you beat him with a strong box and a column of sums. We beat him, Hannah said. The valley pulled their money. Cobb told the street. Reeves stood witness. All I did was add. She smiled a little. I'm good at adding, Daniel. I've been adding up what things really cost my whole life. It was about time the skill did somebody some good. The proper question came a week after the note was paid, when Hannah's hands had healed enough to hold things again, and Daniel Walker did not do it halfway. He waited till a Sunday. He put on his good shirt. He'd washed the last of the fire out of his hair weeks ago, and he'd been carrying something in his coat pocket for days, and Hannah had pretended not to notice the way a woman does. But he didn't take her out to the porch alone. He walked her into the front room where all 6 boys were waiting, lined up, scrubbed and grinning and terrible at keeping a secret. And Noah was bouncing on his heels, and Daniel took Hannah's healed hand in both of his and got the whole thing out plain. Hannah Brooks. The first day you came, you knelt in my yard and asked for a corner where nobody'd run you off before sunrise. And I gave you a storage room with a door that latched, and I thought that was a generous thing. And I was a fool because you'd already given this house more than it had given anybody in 14 months. He drew a breath. I don't want you sleeping in a room in my house. I want it to be your house. I want the boys to be your boys on paper and in church and in every way there is. I've loved you since the morning you made runny eggs for a child you'd known one day. So I'm asking you the whole of it, the way you said you ought to be asked once in your life. Will you marry me, Hannah? Not because you need a room, because this is your home, and we are your family, and we don't want to be your family any other way, but all the way. Hannah looked at the 7 faces in front of her. She'd walked 400 miles to be looked past. She'd buried a husband and a baby girl named Grace, and had gotten so good at goodbye that she'd near said it to these very people out a storage room window in the dark to spare them the cost of loving her. And now a proud man in his good shirt was standing in front of her with 6 boys behind him, asking her to stay all the way on paper in church forever. I stopped looking for a place to sleep a long time ago, Daniel Walker, Hannah said, and her voice broke clean through, and she let it, because she was done with her rule about crying in other people's houses. This wasn't other people's house anymore. Somewhere around the second week of making Noah's eggs, I stopped. I wasn't looking for a room by then. I'd already found a family. I just didn't dare say it out loud in case saying it made it go away. She pressed his hand to her chest. Yes, yes, I'll marry you. Yes to the boys and the church and the paper and all the way. Yes to every bit of it. Noah let out a whoop that rattled the windows, same as Luke's had the night Benjamin first spoke. And then all 6 of them were hollering, and Daniel kissed her right there in front of his sons, and Jacob, who couldn't say a kind word to her for a month, turned around and pretended to be very busy with the fire, so nobody would see him cry, and everybody saw him anyway. And nobody said a word about it, because that was the kind of family they'd become. They married in the little church where Alma Prewitt had once stood up to shame her. The pews were full. Cobb was there, and the Hendersons and Doc Reeves and the churchwoman who'd apologized on the porch step, sitting up front now, and half the valley, besides the same valley that had whispered fortune hunter a few months back. Come to watch Hannah Brooks become Hannah Walker with their own eyes. Because a woman who'd pulled their children out of the fire had earned every seat in that house. Nathan stood up beside his father. Noah carried the ring on a pillow and near dropped it twice. And when the Reverend asked, was there anyone who objected? The whole church went quiet in a way that dared a single soul to try, and not one did. Hannah wore blue. She'd made the dress herself from cloth Benjamin picked, and she carried wildflowers because they'd become her flower without anybody deciding it. And up on the little table beside the altar, somebody had set Mary's blue cup filled with the same, and Hannah had asked for it there on purpose. Are you sure? Daniel had said when she asked. Mary's cup, at our wedding. I'm sure. Hannah had held it a long moment. I never came here to replace her, Daniel. I couldn't and I wouldn't. Those boys had a mother, and she loved them loud right to the end, and she's in every runny egg, and every carved bird, and every stubborn set of that family's jaw. I'm not the second Mary. I'm the first Hannah. She'd set the cup down gentle. But I'll carry her flowers alongside mine so the boys know we didn't shut her out of the room. There's space in a family for more love than one. That's the only thing I ever really taught them. It's the only thing worth teaching. The years came the way years do, and the ranch grew stronger than it had ever been. Nathan took over the books and the crews for good, and stopped carrying it alone, and married a school teacher from the county seat, and slept whole nights. Luke's jokes stayed loud, but they stopped being a wall to hide the quiet behind, because there wasn't any empty quiet left to hide. Benjamin's voice came back the rest of the way, slow, one hard-won word at a time, and his carvings went to market and sold, and folks paid good money for the meadowlarks he made in pairs, always in pairs. Jacob put his fury down for good, and picked up his mother's tanning trade and turned it into a business, and every hide he sold, he thought of the night he'd stayed up scraping them in secret for the creek. Samuel grew up straight-backed, and easy a boy, who'd learned it wasn't his fault who ate at the table like a man who deserved his supper because a woman had told him the truth once, and it had held. And Noah kept the silver coin his whole life in his pocket, and when he was grown, and folks asked what it was, he'd say, it was the fare his mother almost paid to leave and never did, on account of some things are worth more staying than going. They called her mother all 6 of them in the end. Not at first. She never asked it and never pushed it. But it came the way the laugh had come, the way the words had come in its own time, and the first one to say it was Jacob Gruff, not looking at her. And after that, they all did. One summer evening, years on, Daniel and Hannah sat on the porch. Older now gray. Both of them, the house behind them, loud with a family that had grown to take in wives and a grandchild or two. And Daniel took her hand the way he'd been taking it for years. You ever think about it, he said. How near you came to walking out that storage room window in the dark. How near I came to letting a whole county's opinion cost me the best thing that ever came up my road. Every day, Hannah said. And then I stopped thinking about it because I didn't walk out, and you didn't let it. And here we are." She leaned her head on his shoulder, gray hair to gray hair. "A body can't live long in the almost. You only get to live in the is." "And what is," Daniel said, "is that this house hasn't felt empty for one single day since the morning you cracked those eggs. Not one. I keep waiting for the empty to come back the way it came after Mary, and it never does. You filled it, and it stayed filled." His voice went rough. "I don't rightly know how to thank a person for that. There aren't the words for it." "You don't thank a person for it," Hannah said. "You just make room for them. That's the whole of it, Daniel. That's the only thing I ever learned in 30 years of being shut out of rooms. You make room, you take down the good cup off the high shelf, and you let somebody use it. You build a door that locks from her side only. You go into the burning barn. You make room, and you keep making it day after day for the ones who came believing they didn't have a place anywhere on this earth." She squeezed his hand. "I was one of those. You made room. That's all it ever takes. And it's the hardest thing in the world, and this family did it for me when nobody else in 400 miles would. They say even now that if you travel through that part of Montana and ask an old-timer about the Walker Ranch, he won't tell you it ran the most cattle because it didn't, and he won't tell you it was the richest spread in the valley because it wasn't. He'll tell you a different thing. He'll tell you about a heavy woman who walked in off the road one summer with a canvas bag and one silver coin and knelt in the dirt and asked for nothing in this world but a corner where nobody would run her off before sunrise, and about a widower and 6 wrecked boys who tore out a storage room while she was gone and built her a home instead. He'll tell you she became the beating heart of that place, and that the 6 boys grew into the finest men in the county because a woman taught them that kindness is a form of courage, and that there is always, always room for one more. And then the old-timer will lean in because this is the part that matters, the part the whole story was ever really about, and he'll tell you the one true thing every soul in that valley came to know, that the greatest homes on this earth are never built with lumber alone, but by people who choose day after stubborn day to make room for someone who had come to believe they no longer belonged anywhere, and that Hannah Walker, who once buried her last coin and begged for a corner, lived out the rest of her days in the one place she never had to leave, wanted and seen and home all the way home for good. 4.